Chapter 304. The name, Thunder Shaman, made Lu Chen immediately think of the Fire Shaman. The impression of that old barbarian shaman in his memory was so deep that he subconsciously turned his head to look at Hou Yan. They both had the bloodline of the Black Fire tribe, but Hou Yan didn't seem to have any similarities with that incomparably powerful Fire Shaman. One was old, gloomy and deep, while the other was hot-blooded and full of hope. The difference was like the sun and the moon. But then again, the difference in strength between the two was like heaven and earth. In fact, Hou Yan simply couldn't be compared with the Fire Shaman. Lu Chen felt strange that such a strange idea had suddenly appeared in his mind. As for the Thunder Shaman that Hou Yan had recognized, he was one of the most powerful figures in the southern wilderness. The tribe he belonged to was called Thunder Cloud. It was similar to the Thunder Lizard tribe that Lu Chen had seen before, but there was a world of difference between the two. The Thunder Cloud tribe relied on the protection of the Thunder Shaman to become one of the most powerful tribes in the wilderness in recent years. They and several other powerful tribes divided and occupied the former territory of the Black Fire tribe, which was the most fertile land in the southern wilderness. Their strength was far above that of the Black Fire, Thunder Lizard and other small tribes. Oh, so that's how it is. But what does this have to do with the wolf pack that you mentioned? Lu Chen asked Hou Yan. Hou Yan glanced at the yellow sand that had been blown up and said, "Those powerful tribes often like to hunt." Hou Yan said, "Tribes like our Black Fire tribe usually go out to hunt. We find and kill some demon beasts and drag them back to the camp, which is a good food rations. But tribes like the Thunder Cloud tribe have already prepared all the supplies and don't lack food. Therefore they often hold hunts. Although they also hunt demon beasts, it's more to show off their martial prowess." Lu Chen was silent for a while, then said, "It sounds like their hunting momentum is much greater than yours?" "That's a lot bigger." A trace of helplessness flashed across Hou Yan's face as he said, "For a top clan like Lei Yun, the number of demonic beasts they kill in a single hunt is at least 10 times that of us. Therefore at times like this, some of the intelligent demonic beasts have no choice but to avoid the sharp edge, and leave their original habitats to flee in all directions." Only now did Lu Chen understand why Hou Yan was confused about why the wolf pack came here. These demon wolves did not belong here and they probably did not like this barren land, so they would not come here. It was only after receiving the crushing expulsion of the Thundercloud tribe that the wolf pack had no choice but to temporarily hide here. And the price was that the two of them were almost buried in the belly of the wolf. "I wonder if this is considered an undeserved calamity? Then what do we do now?" Lu Chen asked Hou Yan. With regards to the situation of the southern wilderness, Lu Chen was almost in the dark. After all, no human had come here for many years, so it could be said that he knew nothing about the situation of the barbarian tribe. He could only honestly ask this barbarian, who had treated him quite well. Hou Yan answered him without hesitation, "Of course, avoid them and don't provoke them." Lu Chen was a little surprised. In his original impression, the barbarian tribe were mostly ferocious, and lacked the ability to adapt. They were often fearless in the face of danger and refused to retreat. However, Hou Yan's performance these past few days had made him have a whole new level of respect for him. From the first time they met, to the way back to the camp of the Black Fire tribe, and then all the way here, Hou Yan had displayed a special characteristic that was different from the majority of the barbarian tribe. He was both brave and fearless, yet he was calm and wise, and it was even to the extent that he could endure and make concessions. Moreover, he possessed an ability that exceeded everyone's expectations. Once he noticed something unusual about Lu Chen, he'd practically thought through everything in an extremely short period of time and decided to make a huge gamble. If the person who made the decision was Lu Chen, to be honest, even Lu Chen didn't believe that he could do what Hou Yan did. But unfortunately there was no if in this world. "Do we have to avoid these people?" Lu Chen asked him again. Hou Yan nodded and said, "This can't be helped. All the tribes in the wilderness will not be too polite to foreign barbarians who travel alone. They will usually interrogate and search them. If they encounter a situation that is not pleasing to the eye, and their own tribe is strong, they will directly attack or even kill them. This is also a common thing." Lu Chen grinned and thought that in the southern wilderness, martial strength was indeed the most important thing. If one were to travel alone, not only would he have to guard against demon beasts and all kinds of dangers, he would also have to be careful of his fellow barbarians as long as they were not from the same tribe. Then, the two of them took a turn and avoided the yellow sand in front of them and turned to the other side. But in the middle of this, a mournful wolf howl suddenly sounded from the yellow sand in the air. Atsu was the first to stop and then looked back. At this time, Lu Chen noticed that there seemed to be a trace of anger in Atsu's eyes, and he would occasionally let out a low growl. It seemed that he was somewhat angry. And after a while, a cool breeze blew from the sky, brushing against the yellow sand. They finally saw a corner of the yellow sand. When they looked from afar, they saw a pack of wolves. Those ferocious and terrifying demon beasts were madly howling in pain at this moment. Hundreds of agile barbarians were surrounding them. They were holding all kinds of weapons in their hands, and were ferociously stabbing the bodies of these wolves. Blood-red light burst out from under the tough fur, followed by unimaginable painful howls. The strong male wolves in the wolf pack were desperately fighting against those barbarian warriors, trying to protect the weaker female wolves and the pups so that they could escape. However, under the yellow sand the blades were like snow. The barbarians had formed a circle, and were laughing wildly as they gathered. The weaker female wolves and wolf cubs were the first to be chopped to death. Then the crazed male wolves launched a desperate attack against the barbarian warriors. But they were met with an even more powerful and terrifying force. It didn't take long for the entire pack of wolves to fall into a pool of blood. It was unknown how many severed limbs had fallen in this wilderness. It was a bloody scene. This originally powerful pack of wolves had been completely annihilated in one day. "Let's go?" Lu Chen was the first to react. He lowered his voice and asked Hui Yen, who was in a daze, "Let's go?" Hui Yen seemed to have woken up from a dream. His body trembled and then he said softly, "Yes, let's go." The two had already packed up. They didn't have anything else to worry about. Just like that they left with large strides. The strong smell of blood filled this land. They killed an entire pack of demon wolves. Lu Chen asked Hui Yen as they walked, "What if they caught one or a group of people? Those people will die even more miserably. Although those demon wolves are ferocious, most of them were killed with a single slash. But if the two of us were to fall into the hands of the Thundercloud tribe, what will happen?" Hui Yen smiled. "We barbarians don't have such a thing as a captive. They will die. Yes, and they will usually die very miserably. In those large tribes, there is no lack of madmen who like to torture us small tribes." Lu Chen frowned. He didn't say anything, but his expression didn't look good either. Hui Yen quickly walked forward. At the same time he said, "Don't worry. As long as we go to the fire god altar, we won't let anyone do as they please." Lu Chen glanced at him. He didn't know why Hui Yen was so confident. But it seemed that he worshipped the fire god. "Hui Yen? Yes. If I really become a priest in the Black Fire tribe in the future, I will help you. But there are conditions. But it is still too early to talk about these things. But you keep saying that the relationship between a priest and a shaman is only that of a superior and subordinate. Then do I have any hope of becoming a shaman in the future?" Hui Yen was startled. He first smiled, then became silent. After thinking for a while, he said, "You can." Lu Chen was shocked. "You really can?" Hui Yen took a deep breath and said softly, "If you can become a shaman in the future, then it will be the time for our Black Fire tribe to return to the central region. It will be the time for us to recover the glory of our ancestors." Lu Chen stared at him for a while. After confirming that this different barbarian was not joking, he couldn't help but be silent. He then nodded and said, "Very good." Chapter 305. Hui Yen was very afraid of the Thundercloud tribe where the Thunder Shaman was. He took Lu Chen far away from the main force of the Thundercloud tribe. Even if he had to take a big detour and walk twice the distance, he was still willing. Lu Chen did not say much about this. He only chatted with Hui Yen along the way and inquired more about the situation of the southern border barbarian tribe, especially the powerful shaman that Hui Yen mentioned. In Hui Yen's eyes, or from what he said, the shaman that Lu Chen heard was undoubtedly an exceptionally powerful and terrifying existence. It could turn the world upside down, move the mountains and drain the seas, and destroy everything in the southern wilderness, unless another shaman stood up to contend against it. Lu Chen did not comment on this, and most of the time he remained silent. But it was not like he had never seen the so-called barbarian shaman before. The fire shaman in the Battle of the Desolate Valley was indeed an extremely powerful barbarian. He had left Lu Chen with an unforgettable pain that made him wish he was dead for many years. But even so, Lu Chen did not think that the fire shaman's strength could reach the terrifying level that Hui Yen described. In fact, Lu Chen had great doubts about whether the barbarian shaman's strength could approach the level of the deity transformation stage of the human race. In his view, the barbarian shaman's strength should be similar to the Yuanying stage of the human race, perhaps a little stronger but certainly not much stronger. As for the reason, it was actually very simple. If the barbarian shaman was really as powerful and terrifying as Hui Yen said, then there was no need for anyone else. Just the 3 or 4 shamans in the southern wilderness could probably directly flatten the vast divine land of the human race in the north. Unfortunately, now that 1,000 years had passed, the barbarian tribe could only curl up in the southern wilderness, relying on the natural barrier of the land of chaos to separate the north and the south to survive. Yes, when Lu Chen looked at Hou Yen in the vast wilderness, these were some words of disdain that flashed across his heart. The barbarians were certainly strong, but in the face of the powerful strength of the human race in the cultivation age, if there was no barrier of the land of chaos, the southern wilderness barbarians would only have a dead end. After avoiding the Thundercloud tribe, Lu Chen, Hou Yen, Atsu, and the 2 humans and 1 wolf had a relatively smooth journey. They took a long detour in the middle and ran into some small troubles. Most of them were encounters with other barbarians or powerful demonic beasts. If they encountered a small demonic beast, they would kill it if they could. If they couldn't defeat a big demonic beast, they would run away. As for the other barbarians, they would avoid them as much as they could. If they really couldn't avoid them, they would ask Hou Yen to come forward and negotiate with them. Originally, Lu Chen's identity and appearance were a huge problem, but Hou Yen was clearly prepared. He pulled out a linen hood that could cover his head, covering Lu Chen's face. Those barbarians were simple-minded, so they didn't check carefully. They probably didn't expect that a northerner would suddenly come to the wilderness in these thousands of years. However, this linen robe was coarse and shabby, making it very uncomfortable. Lu Chen asked Hou Yen where it came from. Hou Yen laughed dryly and said that it was passed down by an ancestor when the Black Fire tribe still had priests. Lu Chen smiled faintly. It seemed that the Black Fire tribe had been in a miserable state for many years. Along the way, although little troublemakers appeared from time to time, they didn't run into a desperate situation like when they were surrounded by the wolf pack. Finally, they arrived at the sacred mountain where the fire god's altar was. In Hou Yan's words, it was thanks to the fire god's blessing that they were able to arrive safely. Lu Chen asked him with a smile. If the fire god was really blessing the Black Fire tribe and Hou Yen, why didn't the Black Fire tribe improve after so many years? Hou Yen retorted without hesitation. All of this must be the fire god's test for the Black Fire tribe. It was a punishment for the Black Fire tribe's wrongdoings. Now that the punishment was over, the fire god would naturally protect them again. Lu Chen asked curiously, "How do you know the punishment is over?" Hou Yen pointed at him and said, "Aren't you here? You came here and became the Black Fire tribe's priest. That is the fire god's reward for the Black Fire tribe. Since the reward is here, then the punishment is over. There is great hope for the revival of the Black Fire tribe." Lu Chen speechlessly looked up at the sky and smiled bitterly. The so-called sacred mountain was actually a towering mountain range in the southern wilderness. From the outside, there wasn't anything too strange about it. It was similar to the hills and peaks that Lu Chen saw along the way. Most of the peaks were bare and some parts were sparsely covered with trees. It was completely incomparable to the fertile and dense forests of the human Xiationists. But even so, looking at it from another angle, this kind of desolation was actually filled with a vigorous and boundless primitive aura. There was a faint sense of valiance. The sacred mountain was also called the Fire God Mountain, but these 2 names were used by the Black Fire tribe. For many years they had kept this important altar and holy land a secret. Therefore, the other barbarians didn't know about this place and only treated it as an ordinary mountain. They didn't even have a name. After Hou Yen arrived at the Fire God Mountain, he immediately became excited. He knelt down at the foot of the mountain and kowtowed heavily while chanting. Lu Chen listened from the side. The general meaning was that the Black Fire tribe was guilty of letting the fire god's sacred land desolate for so many years. One day, with the blessing of the god, the Black Fire tribe would rise again and rebuild the sacred altar to increase the glory of the fire god. In short, he made a lot of beautiful promises. Hou Yen stood up with a pious expression after he finished saying these words, or rather, after he finished drawing these large flatbreads, he turned around and glanced at Lu Chen. He was startled and asked, "What's wrong with you? Why is your expression so strange?" Lu Chen said, "It's nothing. I just suddenly thought of something. What you said just now sounded very familiar. Is it that every time the Black Fire tribe prays to the fire god for so many years, does it?" Hou Yen thought about it and looked a little embarrassed, but he still nodded and said, "More or less." Lu Chen shook his head and walked forward. At the same time he said, "It's nothing. Let's go. I hope the fire god can really hear your wishes." Gods were all high and mighty, mysterious and unfathomable. Therefore, whether or not the fire god heard Hou Yan's prayer and listened to his words, no one knew. But at least on the way into the mountains they had a smooth journey and did not meet with any trouble. For this, Huoyan thanked the fire god 3 or 4 times along the way. Even Lu Qin had to admit that this barbarian's worship of the fire god was indestructible and deeply rooted. But at this moment, Lu Qin had already lost interest in this problem. He was more concerned about another matter. Huoyan. Lu Qin called out to the barbarian. Didn't you say that the Black Fire tribe left this place many years ago? Why do I feel like you're still very familiar with this place? Huoyan's face was filled with pain and bitterness as he said, most of the tribesmen really don't know anything about this place. At most, they only know that there is a sacred altar in the south that our Black Fire tribe's ancestors worshipped. For a long time, this secret has only been passed down by the tribe leader's bloodline. Then, every time the successor comes of age, they will find a chance to sneak here once to get to know the old path and worship the fire god. Just like that, this secret has been passed down from generation to generation. Lu Qin frowned. Has this always been the way to pass down the secret? After so many years, even with the Black Fire tribe's current predicament, even if you are the bloodline of the tribe leader, you still haven't lost this secret. It really isn't easy. Huoyan proudly said, this is all because of the fire god's blessing. Lu Qin. Alright, you're right. Fire God Mountain looked tall and majestic. Although many of the peaks were bare, there was a powerful aura within the desolation. Huoyan led Lu Qin and Atsu into the mountains for another 2 days, and finally arrived at a remote canyon. When Lu Qin arrived here, especially in this canyon where black rocks could be seen everywhere, including many large black rocks exposed in the gravel, he felt his feet and surroundings start to heat up. The deeper they went, the stronger this feeling became. At the same time, the number of black rocks around them increased. For some reason, Lu Qin suddenly thought of the terrifying abyss of chaos that he had accidentally approached. In the surroundings of that most dangerous place in the world, there seemed to be many black rocks. At the same time, in the depths of that strange and unpredictable abyss of chaos, black seemed to be the main color there. But of course, this place could not be compared to the abyss of chaos. Huoyan led Lu Qin all the way to the deepest part of the canyon, and then looked around vigilantly. After confirming that no one was spying on them, he knelt on the ground and kowtowed 3 times in a pious manner. Then he found an inconspicuous rock pillar that was half exposed from the ground, about 3 feet high. Lu Qin watched from the side for a long time, but he couldn't figure out what was so special about this black rock pillar. However, Huoyan had chosen it. With this black rock pillar as the starting point, the barbarian walked 7 steps towards the north, then another 36 steps towards the east, and another 3 steps towards the north. Finally, he stopped at an open space. Under Lu Qin's somewhat surprised gaze, Huoyan laid down on the ground, and with an extremely strange rhythm, patted the ground 4 times in different directions within a 3 feet radius. Just as Lu Qin was feeling bewildered, suddenly he heard a muffled sound. A heavy stone slab slowly moved away from the ground, revealing a deep, bottomless tunnel that extended downwards. Let's go. Huoyan turned and said to Lu Qin, the altar is below. Chapter 306. The altar is underground? Lu Qin was a little surprised. He glanced at Huoyan and asked. Huoyan nodded his head and beckoned to Lu Qin to follow. Then he took the lead and walked down. Lu Qin turned his head to look at Atsu. He saw that Atsu was also staring at the dark and deep underground tunnel. Apart from that, there didn't seem to be any special reaction. Lu Qin was silent for a moment, but he still followed. Atsu followed behind him and walked into the stone tunnel. When they entered the underground cave, they saw Huoyan standing at the side of the stone steps that extended downwards. He reached out his hand and grabbed a stone on the wall. Then they heard a rumbling sound and the heavy stone slab closed behind them. The light in the cave suddenly dimmed. But after a while, when Lu Qin's eyes gradually adapted to the darkness, he discovered that in the distance of this underground passage, there was a faint dark red light swaying gently. Although the light was still very weak, he could already vaguely see the shadows of the stone steps around him. There was a stuffy air coming from the front, but it wasn't stifling. It was like a faintly discernible hot wind blowing from the depths of the cave. Apart from that, there was nothing strange. The surroundings were very quiet. After a while, Huoyan's low voice sounded from the side. He said in a low voice, "Let's go down." The underground stone tunnel was big enough that even a burly barbarian like Huoyan could walk with his back straight. Lu Qin followed behind him in silence. His eyes would occasionally look around. At this moment, the surroundings were quiet. Apart from the sound of their footsteps, there seemed to be no other movement. It was so quiet that one could even hear their own heartbeat. With the help of the dim light, Lu Chen saw that both sides of the tunnel were incomparably hard stone walls. He had never seen the stone on the walls before. They looked dark and deep, and there were some strange patterns on them. As he walked, he found an opportunity to touch the stone wall beside him. He immediately discovered that the stone wall was not cold but rather warm. This was obviously different from an ordinary underground cave, but it seemed to make sense that this was the location of the fire god altar worshipped by the Black Fire tribe. After all, if the gods were called the god of fire, it was only natural for them to be scorching hot. However, there was another question that Lu Chen did not understand. Therefore, he could not help but ask Huyen, why was this altar built underground? Huyen, who was walking in front, paused for a moment as if he was a little taken aback by this. He then said, I don't know either. It's been like this ever since I found out about this place. He paused for a moment, and then as if he wanted to affirm Lu Chen, he added, it has been like this since the time of our ancestors, or should I say, since the time of the fire god altar. Lu Chen furrowed his brows, and his expression was a little puzzled. He said, but the gods and the like in the legends, don't they always live in the celestial realm? Huyen laughed and waved his hand, saying, I've never heard of this. Is probably what you humans say. Moreover, even if the fire god altar was built underground, there must be an ancient reason. You can't say that the fire god is not a god from the celestial realm, right? Lu Chen wanted to say something but stopped. After thinking for a while, he nodded and said, what you said makes sense. Huyen laughed and did not take it to heart. He continued to walk forward. Lu Chen looked at his back and his expression changed. The light and shadow from afar fell on his face, making his expression look gloomy and uncertain. In the human race of the divine continent, since ancient times, the gods lived in the heavens, and all the altars were built in the open. Apart from natural disasters, landslides, no other god's sacrificial ground would be in the dark underground. In the long history of the human race, there were no gods who built their altars underground. Those who built their altars deep underground had nothing to do with the gods of the heavens. What was hidden deep underground was the third realm that corresponded to the immortal realm and the human realm, the demons and monsters of the underworld. When Lu Chen thought of this, he felt a slight chill in his heart. When he looked at Huyen's back, his gaze became cold. However, Lu Chen had no intention of saying these words to this barbarian who worshipped the fire god. Otherwise, Huyen might not even want the priest that he had been looking forward to, and would fight to the death with him, a human who slandered the gods. When no one spoke, time seemed to pass especially slowly. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed in the dark and gloomy cave, and the stone steps under their feet seemed to extend endlessly downwards. Lu Chen felt that he had walked for a very long time, but the scenery in front of him did not seem to have changed much. However, for some reason, when he looked at this dark tunnel that went deep underground, Lu Chen had a frightening feeling that this was the entrance to the depths of the ghost world. The only thing that changed was that the originally faint and blurry light in front of them, as they continued to descend, it finally began to gradually become clearer and brighter. After walking like this for an unknown amount of time, Lu Chen felt that the surrounding air suddenly began to become stuffy. At the same time, the red light in front of them suddenly brightened, and then a strange low muffled sound was heard. The sound was like a tide and also like a gale, vigorous and solemn. Just as Lu Chen was surprised and bewildered, Huyen suddenly stopped in his tracks, and then with a tone that was mixed with excitement, admiration, worship and fanaticism, he said, "We're here." The "here," in his words, naturally referred to the fire god altar. Lu Chen took a deep breath, hurried a few steps, quickly walked to Huyen's side and then looked ahead. Right now the dark red light had already become extremely bright, because the source of the light had already appeared in front of him. When the magnificent scene appeared in front of Lu Chen's eyes, even with his vast experience, he couldn't help but tremble. In the depths of this deep underground cave, there really wasn't any immortal aura like in the legends of the human race, but here there was a completely different kind of majestic existence. At the end of the black stone tunnel, there was a huge underground cave. A wave of heat blasted out, accompanied by rumbling sounds. That was the source of all the red light, that was the scarlet red burning magma. The scene in front of Lu Chen's eyes, without any concealment, appeared in front of him. The huge underground cave crisscrossing rivers, a few narrow rocks connected to form a passageway, the rest of the place was completely filled with scorching and scarlet red magma. All the magma was constantly flowing, big and small bubbles rising on the surface of the magma, expanding and then exploding. Even from far away he could feel the scorching heat. It wasn't hard to imagine the terrifying temperature of the magma. The entire subterranean cavern was surrounded by this huge magma river. All of the magma flowed continuously in one direction, and everywhere it passed, flames would burn. And in the deepest part of the cave, there was a huge black boulder that was only 3 feet tall on the surface of the magma. It had a circumference of 2 feet, and there were 5 black stone pillars towering over it. When the magma flowed past this boulder, it was unknown what kind of strange terrain there was, but a huge whirlpool actually appeared. As a result, all the magma spun and whistled. Contrary to its previous slow speed, it rushed into this whirlpool at an increasingly fast speed. Countless scorching flames struck the hard black boulder, making a sound like thunder, and then finally disappeared into the depths of the whirlpool, as if once again flowing into the depths of the earth, that unpredictable place. That is the fire god altar. Huoyan turned around and said loudly to Lu Qin. In this underground cave, because the sound of the magma river was rather loud, he had no choice but to raise his voice. Lu Qin took a deep breath, immediately felt the scorching heat in the air directly into his lungs. There was a slight burning sensation. His expression changed slightly. This was the first time he had seen this kind of place. It was really strange and unpredictable. Then he turned to Huoyan, also raising his voice, to ask him, "Then what do we do now?" "Go there." Huoyan pointed at the huge boulder with the 5 black stone pillars from afar, and then walked forward. Lu Qin hesitated for a moment, then turned around and made a gesture to Atsu, indicating that it should stay in this cave passage. Then he himself followed Huoyan and walked over. The path to the huge black boulder, which was also the fire god altar that Huoyan spoke of, was actually a few large boulders that were exposed on the surface of the magma river. They were a little closer to each other. Some places could be walked and some places had to risk jumping over the magma. Looking at the raging flames below, the bright red and bubbling magma, even Huoyan, who worshipped the fire god very much and was an extremely valiant barbarian himself, couldn't help but become cautious and solemn. If he were to accidentally make a mistake, then he would only end up with nothing left of his corpse. Huoyan took the lead and walked forward, and Lu Qin followed behind him, walking and leaping forward on the black stone path. Not long after, they came to a fork in the road. Separated by the magma, one side was the huge boulder that was close to the fire god altar, while the other side that was separated by the magma extended to the other side of the cave. Just as Lu Qin was about to jump over, he was suddenly pulled back by Huoyan. Lu Qin looked at him with some surprise, only to see Huoyan pointing to the other side, and said, "Go that way." As he said this, he leaped and jumped towards the rock that was even further away. Lu Qin hesitated for a moment, then also followed, and then asked Huoyan, "Why not take the shortcut?" Huoyan shook his head and said, "This is the rule passed down by our black flame ancestor at the fire god altar. We can only take the long road, we cannot take the shortcut." Lu Qin was silent for a moment, his eyes slightly flickered, and said, "What if we take the shortcut, what will happen?" Huoyan, who was about to walk forward, suddenly stopped and then stopped. Chapter 307. What you can't say, or this question can't be asked. Seeing that Huoyan's expression was a little strange, Lu Qin didn't show any fear and calmly asked another question. Huoyan was silent for a while, then said, "I don't know." Huoyan said, "For so many years, everyone who came here followed the teachings of our ancestors. No one has ever doubted these words and no one has ever asked this question." Lu Qin nodded and didn't say anything more. Huoyan's gaze was fixed on Lu Qin. After a while, he suddenly said, "I originally thought that you were a gift from the fire god to our black fire tribe, and that you would lead our tribe to prosperity. But now I suddenly can't make up my mind." "Why is that?" Lu Qin raised his eyebrows. He wasn't angry but asked Huoyan curiously. Huoyan's face showed some hesitation, then he said, "Along the way I could see that although you have the same power as the fire god, you don't have any reverence for the fire god. Not only that, you have no reverence for our tribe, for all the rules, customs and gods of the southern wilderness." This tall and burly barbarian stood on the burning river of lava. From afar, it seemed as if his entire body was burning. He stared at Lu Qin, a complicated expression on his face, and his voice became abnormally low. "I now feel that everything you do in the future will be out of line with the people of the wasteland. It will be unexpected and there will be unpredictable consequences. I also don't know what you will do when you become the priest of our Black Fire tribe, and lead us to a true revival. Will it be good or bad for our tribe?" "So you regret it?" Lu Qin asked lightly. Then, on the black rock that suddenly burst into flames in the lava, the two men suddenly became silent. They faced each other, looking straight at each other, and there seemed to be sparks flying in their eyes. After an unknown amount of time, when the stiff and cold atmosphere seemed to reach an unbearable point, Huoyan suddenly turned around and walked forward. At the same time he said in a low voice, "Follow me, the altar is right in front of us." Looking at the tall figure of the barbarian, Lucian was silent for a moment, but he still followed. For the rest of the time the two of them did not speak. They walked one after another, leaping over several extremely dangerous lava fractures. It was equivalent to making a big circle around the surroundings, and then gradually moving inwards, approaching the huge black rock with the fire god's altar one ring at a time. Halfway through, Lucian suddenly felt that this strange and complicated path was actually somewhat like a circle of inward converging whirlpools, just like the huge whirlpool that appeared in the magma river under the Vulcan altar. Was it a coincidence? Lucian glanced at the lava whirlpool that was getting closer and closer. His expression was calm, without any change, but a trace of doubt flashed across his eyes. The two of them walked in this manner for almost 3 rounds, before finally finishing this inexplicably long stone path. Very quickly, at the last place close to the Vulcan altar, an abnormally wide fracture appeared in front of the two of them. It was almost twice the width of the other places. The surging, roaring, and scorching lava flowed under the rock, making one's hair stand on end. Although the scene in front of them looked very dangerous to Huoyan and Lucian, it was not too difficult. Huoyan could be considered as the strongest among the ordinary barbarian warriors. His strength was ferocious and his agility was valiant. With a leap with all his might, he jumped over the fracture. As for Lucian, with the support of the black flames, it was not a problem for him to pass through this obstacle. After seeing Lucian's body lit up with the light of the black flames, and after jumping over the fracture, Huoyan's tensed face finally softened a little. He nodded to Lucian, then turned around and walked towards the location of the 5 black stone pillars. "Hey!" At this moment, Lucian suddenly opened his mouth to call out. Huoyan's body paused for a moment, then he turned to look at him and said, "What's wrong?" Lucian looked straight into his eyes, his expression calm, and said, "Before we go to the altar, I feel that there are some things that I should say to you." Huoyan was silent for a moment, then nodded and walked to Lucian's side saying, "Speak. If we don't talk about the fire god that you all worship from the beginning, it was you who insisted that I enter the Black Fire tribe to help you, and used the secret of returning to the north to threaten me. From the beginning to the end, I did not take the initiative to get involved in your tribe's matters, is that right?" "But that is indeed the fire god," Lucian interrupted Huoyan's words and said, "I said if we don't talk about the fire god's decree for now, is that right?" Huoyan slightly lowered his head and after a moment he nodded and said, "Yes." Lucian said, "At the same time, you also saw that I am a human different from you. But after weighing the pros and cons, even if you had to face many objections and suspicions, you still chose to believe in me and wanted me to help you, is that right?" Huoyan took a deep breath and his face became somewhat solemn. After a while he said, "Yes." Lucian lightly said, "Then you should also understand that as a human, I have no interest in your tribe or anything in the southern wilderness. I am here today only to find out from you a way to return to the north. And to do this, I can only obtain it by helping your tribe to become strong again. So I can only help you, you don't have to doubt me on this. But other than that, my actions in the future will definitely not be exactly what you expect. If it is really for the prosperity of the Black Fire tribe, you have to give me a promise right now. Can you completely trust me? Otherwise, what if you suddenly turn hostile and stab me in the back when I am halfway through my task? Then wouldn't I be wronged?" Huoyan became silent, and after a while he said in a low voice, "All the barbarians in the wilderness believe in the gods, and worship the ancestors of the tribe. Only you are not." Lucian shrugged his shoulders and said, "You are right." Huoyan suddenly became a little agitated, and his face became a little red. He took a step forward and said, "I am not asking you to do anything excessive, it is just. At this point he was momentarily speechless as if he did not know how to continue. Lucian picked up where he left off and said, "Don't do anything out of line? Don't do things that you cannot accept, or other things that you barbarians cannot stand." Huoyan clenched his teeth and said in a deep voice, "The rules of the wilderness must be followed by every barbarian. But I am not a barbarian." The two people looked at each other, their eyes bright and sharp like blades, and there seemed to be sparks flying in the snow-white light. However, since ancient times, the truth that silence could not solve all problems was the first to come true. After a while, Huoyan said, "Then what do you want to do?" I can't really let you lead the Black Fire tribe to an irreversible situation. Lucian said, I also don't know what I want to do, but you have to understand that I don't know what the Black Fire tribe needs to do to rise again, and what it needs to face. But he fixed his eyes on Huyen and suddenly laughed. He then said calmly, actually, I have a question that I want to ask you. What? You're the most powerful barbarian I've ever seen since I came to the southern wilderness. Your insight and decisiveness are outstanding. But from your perspective, if everything goes according to the rules you've mentioned, and you don't do anything out of line, even if your tribe adds a normal priest, what are the chances of the Black Fire tribe truly reviving and returning to its former glory? Huyan's body suddenly trembled as if he had been shocked by an electric shock. Then he fell into silence again. After a long time, his voice seemed to be unusually stiff, but he still gritted his teeth and said bit by bit, Impossible? It's too difficult. It's fine if the other tribes don't have priests, but the tribes with priests are already very powerful, almost no weaker than our Black Fire. Even if you're a little more powerful than ordinary priests because of the gift from the fire god, there are still the most powerful tribes in the wilderness further away, and there are also the few shamans. When the word shaman came out of Huyan's mouth, Lucian saw fear and reverence in his eyes. Perhaps this was the natural belief of all barbarians in the wilderness. Then Lucian laughed. He walked over and gently patted the tall and burly barbarian's shoulder. He said in a gentle tone, Since it's like this, why don't you let me try? Although it's still very difficult, what if there's a little hope of success? You see, after all, our wishes are the same. You want the tribe to be strong and I want to return to the north. Even if there are some unusual places along the way, it's not important, right? What do you think? Lucian said to Huyen with a smile. Huyen was silent for a long time. A variety of complicated expressions flashed across his face. But in the end he finally nodded slowly and heavily. You are right, he said in a low voice. Chapter 308. This underground altar, which had been burning and rumbling in the depths of the earth and had not been known to outsiders for many years, seemed to have long been in ruins. Although the surrounding lava river was very grand, but the things on the black boulder had long been mottled and peeled off over the years. There were cracks all over the 5 black stone pillars, and there were even gaps in many places. Other than that, Lucian didn't see anything like the legendary fire god statue on the black boulder. It was called an altar, but there wasn't even a statue of the god? This seemed a little unusual, or perhaps the customs of the barbarians were different from those of the northern human race. Lucian asked Huyen this question in his heart, but Huyen did not know. He only said that when he came here the fire god altar was already like this. But at the same time, Huyen confidently told Lucian that there was not much difference between the barbarians and the human race when it came to worshipping the gods. It could even be said that most of the time, the barbarians actually respected and worshipped the gods more than the human race, so their ceremonies were more solemn. Usually, on an altar, there would be a statue of a deity that was enshrined. At this point, Huyen's expression became a little strange and he looked at Lucian. Lucian said helplessly, Or was it passed down from the earliest ancestors of your Black Fire tribe? Yes. Lucian thought for a moment and said, Then in your tribe, what does the supreme fire god look like? Huyan's face immediately revealed a look of reverence. He gestured in the air with his hand and said, It is a gigantic ball of scorching flames. It is the first ball of fire that was born at the beginning of the world, the ancestor of all flames. Lucian frowned and asked, It is a flame? Huyen nodded his head heavily. Suddenly, as if he had come to a sudden realization, he clapped his hands together and said excitedly, I know. This place is filled with lava and raging flames, like a disaster. Flames are everywhere, isn't this the incarnation of the fire god? It is basically omnipresent, so why bother to erect a statue of a god? As soon as he finished speaking, Huyan's face was filled with excitement. Waving his hand at Lucian, he quickly walked to the center of the 5 black pillars and knelt down. Lucian walked over slowly, but his eyes were constantly looking around. As far as he was concerned, he still had some doubts about the existence of the fire god. Naturally, he did not have any faith or reverence. When he walked to the center of the altar, he did not even have the intention to kneel. However, this was not an ordinary place after all. It was a place where gods were worshipped. In addition, the Blackfire tribe was once powerful for a period of time, and even had many powerful shamans. Therefore, Lucian had to be careful in secret. Huyen kowtowed a few times on the ground, praying and chanting. But after waiting for a while, he found that there was no movement in the surroundings. He hurriedly looked back and his face was filled with anger and anxiety. He reached out and pulled on Lu Chen's clothes and said in a low voice, "Quickly kneel down and worship the fire god." Lu Chen was speechless. Just as he was about to retort, he sighed in his heart when he saw Hoi Yan's expression. In the end, he still knelt down and imitated Hoi Yan's previous actions. He actually began to kowtow. He was a shadow that had lived in the darkness since he was young. Apart from the agreement he had with Lord Tianlan in the depths of his heart, Lu Chen did not have much faith in the first half of his life. Or it could be said that Lu Chen was actually not sure whether there were gods in this world. Since he had no faith, he naturally did not have any persistence. In the past, when he was a spy in the evil cult, he had knelt many times, including to his master and the evil cult's god. Apart from the devoutness on the surface, he had always been sneering in the depths of his heart. He coldly looked at the world, looked at human feelings, looked at all gods and ghosts, and had no faith. On this day, when he knelt down in front of the altar that was surrounded by burning flames, for some reason, Lu Chen suddenly seemed to see through himself. What kind of person was this? He suddenly felt a chill in his heart, and there was some confusion in the depths of his eyes. The same resolute and devoutness of faith that had deceived the world's most cunning and treacherous evil cult members 10 years ago, right now, in front of a barbarian like Hoi Yan, Lu Chen's performance could be said to be flawless. Even Lu Chen's performance was too perfect, and even Hoi Yan himself was stunned. He did not dare to believe it. Not long ago this person was still suspicious of the fire god, but right now he had suddenly become so devout. The change was really too great. But no matter what, this was the time to worship the god at the fire god altar. Devoutness was much better than arrogance and rudeness. Therefore Hoi Yan felt even more gratified, turned around and continued to kowtow. The two of them faced the empty fire god altar and worshipped for a long time. The surrounding magma surged and flowed, and there were 5 black stone pillars standing majestically, but other than that there was no other movement. Hoi Yan raised his head in puzzlement and looked around. At the same time, Lu Chen's voice came from behind asking, "When you came here to worship before, was it also like this?" Hoi Yan hesitated for a moment and said, "Yes. Because our ancestors said, the fire god has always only responded to the prayers of priests or shamans. No matter how devout we barbarian warriors are, because we don't have that spiritual power, the fire god will not pay attention to us." As he said this, his eyebrows slightly raised and he looked at Lu Chen saying, "You have the spiritual power of the fire god in your body, the same origin and the same kind. If you are really our priest, the fire god will definitely respond to you." At this moment, there was already some sharpness within Hoi Yan's eyes. However, Lu Chen did not panic. After musing for a moment, he stood up and extended his hand to touch his chest. A faint light flashed and the half of the fire god's staff once again appeared in his hand. Seeing the appearance of the fire god's staff, Hoi Yan's face suddenly showed some excitement, and he stood up immediately. Lu Chen waved his hand at him, indicating that he should not be excited. At the same time he stood to the side, and then walked alone to the center of the 5 black stone pillars. He looked around with a solemn expression, but in his heart, he sneered. Then he suddenly raised the half of the fire god's staff high above his head, and both of his hands tightly grasped the staff. At the same time he seemed to be mumbling something, but in reality he was just randomly humming a few times. But unexpectedly in his eyes, a black flame suddenly appeared, and a dark and powerful aura suddenly gushed out from his body. With a whoosh sound, the black flame emerged from Lu Chen's body, swaying and dancing wildly, burning, but completely ignoring his clothes. And almost at the same time the fire god's staff in Lu Chen's hand suddenly lit up. The light was dazzling, as if a scorching sun had suddenly lit up in the depths of the earth, emitting a radiance that was tens of thousands of feet long. All kinds of twisted, strange runes flashed and lit up on the fire god's staff. A majestic and ancient aura, far more majestic than before, suddenly emitted from the ancient staff. Hoi Yan, who was standing outside of the 5 black stone pillars, for a moment could not look directly at the dazzling light, and subconsciously used his hands to cover his eyes. But after a moment he suddenly heard a deafening roar coming from behind him. At the same time the huge black stone under his feet also began to shake and tremble. His footing was unstable and the sky and earth were spinning. The tens of thousands of feet of light were dazzling, and there was even the sound of a surging tide. It was as if the depths of the earth had suddenly boiled. When Hoi Yan turned around in shock, he saw that in this huge underground cavern, the lava river that originally seemed to have calmly flowed for thousands of years, had completely changed. The scorching and terrifying red lava, roared and roared as if it was boiling. Wave after wave surged up, the waves rising higher and higher, and gradually began to overflow the black stones, submerging them one by one. The huge black stone where the fire god altar was located was the highest point, but countless amounts of lava rushed over from all directions, crazily hitting the huge stone. The huge black stone began to shake violently. Hui Yin stood on top, almost unable to stand steadily. His entire face was pale with fright. Behind him, the person holding the fire god's staff seemed to be oblivious to the increasingly dangerous situation outside, as if a disaster was about to befall them. He only held the staff in his hand, looking up at the sky. In the depths of the brilliance, under the shadow of the strong light, at that moment, Lu Chen's mind suddenly recalled that day in the wilderness of the land of chaos, the last words of the dying old barbarian priest. Bring the fire god staff back to the southern wilderness, bring it back to the fire god altar, bring it back to the fire god's side. He originally thought that this was the most ridiculous thing in the world, and also the most impossible thing to achieve. But in the unseen world, after a few turns, he suddenly discovered that he was actually standing here. Could it be that there really was a deity in this world, that the fire god really existed? He stared at the depths of the distant shadow outside the brilliant flames, remained silent, and then suddenly raised the fire god's staff, heavily knocked on the huge black stone, right in the middle of the altar. Boom! The entire underground cave instantly shook, all the lava in that instant soared into the sky. A terrifying and suffocating scorching feeling was about to drown everything, until a beam of light shone in from the side of the huge black stone. Under the huge lava whirlpool, a ray of brilliance rose up, a magnificent roar resounded throughout the underground, like an ancient elegy recounting the sad past. In the depths of the brilliance, half of the staff was surrounded by raging flames, burning, emitting thousands of rays of brilliance. It curled up from the lava whirlpool, rose all the way to the peak of the lava, and then flew towards the fire god altar. Lu Chen silently looked at the flying staff, suddenly threw out the half of the fire god's staff in his hand. The two staffs converged in midair with a loud bang, the fiery light suddenly flourished, magma danced wildly all around, crazily surging up to the dome, but only the huge rock of the altar was not tainted in the slightest. After a moment, the light dissipated, the two staffs in midair had already converged into one, and then flew downwards. A buzzing sound was heard, directly piercing into the incomparably hard black stone. Chapter 309. After an unknown number of years, they once again merged into one, forming a complete fire god staff. It was calmly inserted into the black boulder. The black boulder that could withstand the terrifying heat was easily pierced through like tofu in front of the fire god's staff. Lu Chen took 2 steps back, then glanced at Hui Yin who was standing at the side. He saw that this barbarian's face was filled with excitement. All the doubts, worries and hesitation that he once had, were now completely gone. In this ancient holy land, the god of fire had once again proven to him that he was not wrong about him. This human was indeed the messenger that the fire god had specially chosen. He carried the will of the fire god, and together with the Black Fire tribe, he would bear the heavy responsibility of reviving the tribe. At this moment he felt Lu Chen's gaze on him and also looked at him. At the same time, he nodded excitedly as if he did not know what to say. Lu Chen walked to his side and softly said, "It has never been like this before?" Hui Yin said, "Yes, it has been a few generations, a few hundred years, and the fire god has never responded to us like this on the altar." Lu Chen looked around and saw that with the revival of the fire god's staff, the surging and roaring magma had already begun to calm down, returning to its original state of slow flowing. However, on the many black boulders, one could still clearly see the traces of the previous crazy burn. Those ghastly scars were like the angry roars of a god, causing people to tremble just by looking at them. Lu Chen said to Hui Yin, "The fire god's staff has been revived. Don't you want to go and worship it or pick it up to take a look?" Hui Yin was silent for a moment, then he firmly shook his head and said, "There's no need. This is a divine weapon that the fire god bestowed upon you. It's useless for me to take it." "A divine weapon, huh?" Lu Chen smiled faintly and walked to the front of the fire god's staff. He stretched out his hand and held the staff. His eyes narrowed slightly as he stared at the fire god's staff that seemed to be flowing with brilliance and had an extraordinary aura. After a moment he didn't seem to use much strength. It was as if he had just raised his arms slightly, and the fire god's staff rose from the ground. All sorts of brilliance flowed and flickered, and then slowly settled down. Finally, all of it retracted back into the staff and disappeared, turning the fire god's staff back into a seemingly ordinary staff. A strange and subtle aura came from where Lu Chen was holding the divine staff, echoing in his mind. Scenes that seemed like ancient poems or scenes from the past appeared one by one. His vision suddenly darkened. At that moment, it was as if Lu Chen's entire body had suddenly lost all weight. His entire body floated up as if he was in an endless darkness. Then he raised his head and lowered his head. In front of him and behind him, countless stars lit up, layer upon layer, endless. There was a delicate incantation that came from the depths of this empty starry sky. It drilled into his mind and turned into strange characters that were engraved in his heart. It was as if the eyes of the gods were looking at him, and the magnificent and great Sanskrit was faintly humming. There was the light of a flame burning, rapid and grand. In an instant, it burned through the starry sky and swallowed everything, no matter if it was light or darkness. Therefore there was only raging fire left in the void. Everywhere was a sea of fire. The flames surrounded Lu Chen's body. It was as if there were countless arms tearing at his body, wanting to tear him into pieces. A terrifying pain suddenly rose up. There was actually a sense of familiarity. It was the pain of the curse that had entangled him for the past 10 years. And in the depths of the flames in front of him, there was a huge screen of flames that suddenly rose up. There was a terrifying mountain of corpses and a sea of blood, from ancient times to the present, from the sky to the earth. Boom! Suddenly, a loud sound exploded like thunder from a clear sky. It caused Lu Chen, who was in a daze, to suddenly wake up. When he turned to look, he saw that Hoi Yan's face was filled with shock. Hoi Yan's hands were tightly hugging Lu Chen's body. Lu Chen did not know when, but he was already standing at the edge of the huge black rock. Half of his foot had already stepped out and was suspended above the magma outside. If he took another step, he would be consigned to eternal damnation and die without a complete corpse. Hoi Yan roared angrily. He dragged Lu Chen a few steps back, away from the frightening edge of the black rock. Perhaps because they were too agitated and used too much force, the two of them even fell to the ground together. "What's wrong with you?" Hoi Yan leapt up and glared at Lu Chen as he roared. Lu Chen was silent for a moment. Then he slowly stood up. His gaze swept across the fire god's staff that was still in his hand. After a while, he briefly described to Hoi Yan the scene he had just seen. Then he asked, "Probably, I saw the fire god that you revere?" Hoi Yan's body shook violently. An expression of disbelief appeared on his face. But soon after, he seemed to have thought of something and silently nodded his head. There was an excited expression on his face. "Is it because the fire god's power is too great that you can't control it for a while?" Hoi Yan probed. Lu Chen recalled the scene he had just experienced. It actually somewhat overlapped with a certain scene in the depths of his memory. This caused him to subconsciously stretch out his hand to touch his chest. After a moment of silence, he said to Hoi Yan, "When your Black Fire tribe still had priests, was the so-called inheritance of law and power all like this?" Hoi Yan immediately shook his head. He seemed very certain as he said, "No. Although our tribe hasn't had a priest for many years, I have long heard of what happened in the past from my father. When the priests were still in our tribe, every generation of priests were directly taught by the shaman or priest of the previous generation. Except." At this point his expression suddenly changed. Lu Chen immediately sensed the change in Hoi Yan's expression. He asked, "Except what?" The excitement on Hoi Yan's face faded slightly. There seemed to be a little more surprise and doubt. When he looked at Lu Chen again, there were some complicated emotions in his eyes. He said, "Except in the legends, our tribe's first-generation shaman ancestor, we call him the Great Shaman. It is said that the Great Shaman was the first barbarian to comprehend the power of the fire god. Only he was able to directly obtain the spiritual power of the fire god in the Sea of Fire." He glanced at Lu Chen. After gritting his teeth he said, "Just like you did today. Let's go." Lu Chen said to Hoi Yan. Hoi Yan agreed. Just as he was about to turn around, he turned his head worriedly to look at Lu Chen. With a trace of nervousness he said to Lu Chen, Did you really comprehend the power of the fire god?" Lu Chen smiled. "I also don't know how strong its power is, so I can't say for sure. But from the looks of it, it should be okay, especially when I have this fire god staff." "Huh?" Hoi Yan looked at him with some doubt. But he didn't ask much. After all, there was still a long way to go. He turned around to go back the way he came. "Wait a minute." Lu Chen stopped him. "Let's go another way." "Another way?" Hoi Yan was stunned. Lu Chen took 2 steps forward. His face was calm. His eyes gazed at the sea of magma in front of him. Suddenly he raised the fire god staff with both hands, drew it in the air and pointed it forward. In the huge cavern there was a sudden gust of wind. The whistling sound circled around Lu Qin. Light flashed from the fire god's staff. After a moment, an ancient, powerful, vast and boundless aura emitted from Lu Qin's body. The flowing magma suddenly sped up, as if it had suddenly become agitated. And under the magma, there was a rumbling sound as if the earth was shaking. Not long after there was suddenly a loud sound. Amidst the rumbling sound, a cluster of black rose from the scarlet magma. It was the black stones that were similar to the surroundings. Following that, more and more black stones rose. The magma was like a raging beast, roaring and roaring continuously. However, it could not stop the black stones that rose abruptly from biting and joining together, forming a black bridge that spanned across the entire sea of magma and fire. When everything calmed down again, Lu Qin and Hui Yen stood on this newly appeared bridge that seemed to still have the scorching aura of the magma below. Remnants of fire could be seen everywhere on the bridge. They looked at each other. Then Hui Yen nodded. Lu Qin smiled and walked forward. At the same time he said, "Let's go from here, a new path." Chapter 310. As they walked out of the underground cavern, Atsu came up to greet them. This black wolf seemed to have sensed something and kept staring at Lu Qin. But other than that, Atsu didn't do anything else. It didn't roar but just quietly followed behind Lu Qin, all the way back to the surface. They didn't know how long they stayed underground. When they returned to the Black Stone Canyon, the sky was dark. It was already late at night. In the vast night sky, countless stars twinkled, like pearls decorating the deep sky. Under the starry sky, the mountains and the earth seemed to become insignificant. Those who looked up at the starry sky seemed to feel like they were just a speck of dust. Under the starry sky, in the night wind, they gazed into the distance for a long time. The wind faintly carried their soft and indistinct voices, as if they were discussing something. Maybe it was the heaven and earth, or maybe it was the past, or maybe it was the future hope of this path. Afterwards, they turned around and left this place, causing this originally desolate gorge to once again sink into silence. Only the cold starlight lingered in this place, unwilling to give up. On the way back, Hui Yen and Lu Qin were extremely careful. However, compared to their previous journey, their journey this time seemed to be smoother. Not only did they rarely encounter any powerful demonic beasts, they didn't even encounter any powerful clans or tribes. As for the incomparably powerful Thundercloud tribe that unexpectedly appeared near the northern border, it seemed to have already left this place, relieving them of one of their biggest worries. In Lu Qin's eyes, this was really good luck. In Hui Yan's eyes, this was the blessing of the fire god. Because of all these reasons, they returned almost 2 days earlier than expected. They arrived near the Black Fire Tribe's camp that day. This was originally a comfortable and happy journey, until they saw a few plumes of black smoke rising from the Black Fire Tribe's camp. Atsu suddenly roared towards the front, the hair on its neck stood up, and its eyes revealed a fierce light. Hui Yen and Lu Qin's expressions changed almost at the same time. Hui Yen roared angrily and rushed forward. At the same time, a trace of fear faintly appeared on his face. Lu Qin followed behind the furious barbarian warrior. His eyebrows were tightly knitted, and his mood was indescribably complicated. Of course, he didn't have the same deep feelings for the Black Fire tribe as Hui Yen did. To be honest, if it wasn't for the secret of returning north from Hui Yen, he really wouldn't care if this damn tribe was dead or alive, or if it was thriving or declining. But now that they had boarded the pirate ship, Lu Qin of course hoped that the Black Fire tribe would have better luck. At this moment, Lu Qin didn't know whether to laugh or cry as he looked at the murderous black smoke in front of him. Reviving the Black Fire tribe was an extremely difficult mission. If the Black Fire tribe was destroyed before he took over, that would truly make him want to cry, but no tears would come out. It was obvious that Hui Yen had also thought of this. His worry for the tribe drove him to the brink of insanity in his anger and fear. He roared as he rushed forward. Lu Qin, on the other hand, was much calmer as he followed behind him. His gaze swept across the surrounding desert, carefully observing the movements behind the sand dune plants. They rushed all the way into the Black Fire tribe's camp. Along the way, the two did not meet with any obstructions or enemies. But the scene that greeted them caused Hui Yen to stop in his tracks and hold his breath. The huge camp of the tribe was in a complete mess. Many houses had collapsed. Traces of fighting and burning could be seen everywhere. In the ruins of the village, among the rocks and charred firewood, the corpses of barbarians could be seen lying motionless on the ground from time to time. The smell of blood drifted from the front along with the wind. Hui Yen suddenly let out an inhuman howl of pain, like a despairing demonic beast in a hopeless situation. A trickle of blood flowed from the side of his mouth. He had bitten his lips. At that moment, his eyes were filled with regret, and his body was trembling slightly. With a thud, he finally knelt on the ground. He clenched his fists and pounded the ground in front of him with all his might, as if he had gone mad. But at this moment, a hand suddenly reached out from the side and pulled him back. Hui Yan's body stopped, and he raised his head to look with a pair of bloodshot and furious eyes. It was Lu Qin who had come to his side. Hui Yan stared at Lu Qin, his eyes burning with a flame that could kill him. But Lu Qin didn't seem to notice it. His face was calm as usual, as if the tragic scene around him had no meaning to him. He just lowered his body slightly and said to Hui Yan in a low voice, "There are too few corpses. Your tribe has far more people than this." Hui Yan's body shook as if he had suddenly woken up. The expression in his eyes quickly calmed down. After a while, he nodded to Lu Qin, gritted his teeth and stood up. He then quickly walked into the depths of the camp and began to examine the surrounding situation. He dragged out the barbarian corpses from the ruins and placed them in an open space. About an hour later, the two of them had searched the entire Black Fire tribe's camp. Then they dragged out the corpses and placed them in the open space in the middle of the camp. There were a total of 11 corpses. Among the 11 corpses, 3 or 4 of them had been badly burned and their faces could no longer be seen clearly. The remaining corpses were obviously old men or women. There was not a single one of the young, strong and ferocious barbarian warriors of the Black Fire tribe. Hui Yan and Lu Qin stood side by side next to the 11 corpses. Atsu did not seem to like the scene here. He ran to the sandy ground outside the camp and lay down. A mournful wind blew from the wilderness from afar. Lu Qin turned his head to look at Hui Yan. When the wind ruffled the hair of this brave and burly barbarian, Lu Qin saw that there was still pain and regret in his eyes. But at the same time, it was obvious that he was relieved. "These people are all my tribesmen." Hui Yan's voice sounded very low but very clear. 8 old men and 3 women. I can call out their names. As he said this, he pointed at the corpses, pressed his hand on his chest and lowered his head in silence. Lu Qin waited for a while, then calmly said, "From the situation here, it is very likely that the Black Fire tribe was ambushed by external enemies. But from the corpses, it should be the warriors of your tribe who escorted most of your tribesmen out of here." Here he paused and said, "We are going to look for them." Hui Yan glanced at him and said, "Why can't it be another tribe who ambushed and defeated our tribe, and then abducted all of our people?" Lu Qin shook his head and said, "With your usual vision and calmness, there is no way that you can't figure out the reason behind this. You're just confused now. The warriors of the Black Fire tribe are brave and valiant. At least in my opinion, there is no one who is afraid of death. If it really came to that, the number of corpses here today would be 10 times more." Hui Yan closed his eyes and was silent for a long time. Then he let out a long breath and said, "You are right." He stared at Lu Qin and said in a low voice, "It seems that I was right to ask you to be the priest." Lu Qin smiled and said, "I said these are not difficult things to hide. If it were you, you would be able to see it too. It is just that you are too worried now." Hui Yan clenched his fist tightly and looked at the corpses on the ground. He silently lowered his head and said a few words, then suddenly turned and walked out of the camp. At the same time he said, "Let's go, we will go after them." Lu Qin followed. At this moment Atsu, who was outside the camp, suddenly stood up. After stretching his body, he suddenly faced the vast sky and let out a long howl. The mournful howl of the wolf echoed in this cold and desolate wasteland. Chapter 311. As they walked out of the camp, Hui Yan asked Lu Qin if there was any way to find the missing tribesmen through witchcraft. Lu Qin naturally shook his head and denied it. At the same time, he had a new understanding of the unfathomable superstition of witchcraft of these barbarians. However, it seemed that Hui Yan did not have much hope in this matter. He was just hoping for a fluke. After receiving Lu Qin's reply, he frowned and observed the surroundings. After a moment of contemplation, he led Lu Qin in a certain direction. "Do you have an idea?" Lu Qin was a little surprised and asked beside him. Hui Yan wanted to say something but stopped. He smiled bitterly and said, "It's not easy to survive in the northern part of the wilderness. Normally, every tribe would leave a way out for themselves. There's such a place in front of us. Let's go and take a look first." Lu Qin nodded and felt a little relieved. Since there was such a way out, it was highly likely that most of the Black Fire tribe had escaped. Although he did not have any deep feelings for this tribe, he still hoped that the Black Fire tribe would be well. Otherwise, it would be really embarrassing for the entire tribe to be exterminated right after they accepted the fire god's gift to become the tribe's priest. Not thinking about this matter any longer, Lu Qin quickly thought of another important question. He glanced at Hui Yan and said in a low voice, "Can you tell who the enemy was?" Hui Yan's body paused for a moment. A trace of anger flashed across his eyes, but he shook his head. However, after a moment of silence, Hui Yan said, "It's none other than the other tribes in this land. The Thunder Lizard, the Divine Wood, the Ghost Fox and the Mountain Spirit tribe that we defeated a few days ago." Lu Qin frowned and said, "The Mountain Spirit tribe suffered heavy losses that day and their priest died. I don't think it's possible. But let's not talk about whether they have the ability or not. At the very least, it makes sense that the Mountain Spirit tribe would come back for revenge. But you don't trust the 3 tribes that fought with the Mountain Spirit tribe that day?" Hui Yan coldly laughed. His face was cold as he said, "We're all living in this barren land. Who can trust anyone else? If there's a chance, I won't hesitate to stab someone in the back." Lu Qin looked at him deeply, then nodded and said, "I see." On the way to the secret hiding place of the Black Fire tribe, Hui Yan, who had gradually calmed down, introduced the situation of the land where the Black Fire tribe was located to Lu Qin, the future priest of the Black Fire tribe. Just as he had said before, because this was the most desolate and harsh place in the southern wilderness, the relationship between the few tribes living here was very subtle. Conflicts between the tribes would occur from time to time. Including the original Mountain Spirit tribe, among the 5 tribes here, the Black Fire tribe had always been in the middle position. It wasn't the strongest, but it wasn't the weakest either. But compared to the glorious history of many years ago, the current Black Fire tribe was, of course, extremely unworthy. This made Hui Yan, a barbarian who cherished his ancestors, feel depressed and humiliated. Among the 5 tribes there were strong and weak ones, but overall there wasn't much of a difference. Otherwise, if a tribe was really weak, it would have long been swallowed up by others. And if a tribe suddenly became strong like the Mountain Spirit tribe not long ago, then the other tribes would band together and attack it. It could be considered a strange and dangerous balance. Lu Qin asked about the situation in detail and then became thoughtful along the way. The 2 of them walked with the Atsu tribe. After about half a day's journey, they arrived at a rare oasis in the desert. But this oasis looked very small. There wasn't much water, and the surrounding forest didn't look very lush, as if it could dry up at any time. There was no one around this small oasis. Occasionally they would see 1 or 2 lone monsters running from the desert in the distance. They were probably there to drink a few mouthfuls of water. Lu Qin looked at the oasis with some doubt. No matter how he looked at it, although this small oasis could provide some water, it didn't seem like a place that could hide such a large population of the Black Fire tribe. Sure enough, Hui Yan didn't walk directly into the small oasis. Instead, he circled around and walked to the back of the oasis. There were 5 or 6 connected sand dunes there, looking like an uneven sand wall. There were also some protruding rocks buried in the sand, only a small part of them exposed on the ground. Lu Qin followed Hui Yan to the back of the sand dunes and watched him walk all the way to a large rock at the back of the sand dunes. Hui Yan stuck his left hand into the sand and pulled it open. There was a soft rustling sound as the sand flowed. At the same time, a stone slab was pushed open, revealing a black hole. Lu Qin unconsciously took a step forward. At the same time he cursed in his heart. Did the Black Fire tribe worship the god of fire or the god of earth? Why do they like to dig holes in the ground every day? Looking at the pitch-black cave entrance, before they could even make a move, they heard a few angry curses coming from inside the cave. A few cold lights flashed, and a moment later 2 figures jumped out, roaring angrily as they slashed at Hui Yan and Lu Qin. Lu Qin took 2 steps back and let them go. He didn't have any intention of fighting back. With Hui Yan around, this kind of thing would naturally be easily settled. Sure enough, Hui Yan dodged the chopping axe and shouted, "Stop, it's me." The 2 barbarian warriors, who were originally full of murderous intent, trembled when they heard this. Then their eyes revealed a look of surprise as they looked at Hui Yan. They shouted in unison and almost simultaneously rushed forward, hugging Hui Yan and shouting a few words. Their expressions were extremely excited. Hui Yan was also very happy. After all, he didn't come empty-handed. Since there were people here, it was very likely that the other tribesmen were here as well. Even so, he still had to ask them personally. Hui Yan grabbed a barbarian beside him and asked anxiously, Black Bull, what about the others? Are they all right? The barbarian warrior called Black Bull nodded repeatedly and pointed to the hole. The tribesmen are hiding in there. They're fine for the time being. As he said this, a trace of sadness flashed across his face. But at the camp, we didn't have time to save them. A few of them died. I'm sorry, Huoyen. When you weren't here, we didn't protect the tribe well. Huoyen patted Black Bull's shoulder and said in a deep voice, "It's not your fault. Come, bring me in to have a look." The Black Bull hurriedly agreed. Just as he took a step forward, a startled expression suddenly appeared on his face. Only at this moment did he see Lu Chen and Atu standing to the side. Furthermore, he saw Lu Chen's extremely calm expression as he leisurely walked over and walked shoulder to shoulder with Huoyen towards the cave entrance. In Lu Chen's hand, the fire god's staff, which was half its original length and had become complete, was in his hand. Just as Black Bull was in a daze, a voice suddenly came from the front. It wasn't Huoyen's but the human male. He asked Black Bull, "Do you know who the enemy who launched a sneak attack on the tribe is?" Black Bull opened his mouth but didn't say anything. His expression was a little strange. But at the same time, Huoyen's dignified voice came again. "Speak. Lu Chen is now the priest of our Black Fire tribe. He's the messenger sent by the Supreme Fire God. Messenger of the Fire God. Priest." The two barbarian warriors, including Black Bull, were immediately stunned. They didn't dare to believe it, but Huoyen's prestige was extremely high, so they didn't dare to question him. They could only follow behind him with strange expressions on their faces. Only when Lu Chen asked again did they wake up as if they had just woken up from a dream. They replied, "It was done by the Divine Wood tribe." Chapter 312. Divine Wood tribe? Huoyen and Lu Chen glanced at each other, but didn't say anything. The two walked into the cave, and after passing through a narrow passageway, the front suddenly opened up to reveal an extremely spacious cave. At the same time, there were several torches lit, but it didn't make people feel suffocated. It was obvious that there was another unobstructed vent. Most of the people of the Black Fire tribe were gathered here. Hearing the sound of footsteps, someone turned around and immediately saw the tall and sturdy Huoyen, and immediately cried out in surprise. This movement quickly alerted the other people, especially those tall and strong barbarian warriors in the crowd. They gathered around Yi Shiwen one after another. Their faces were filled with pleasant surprise. Huoyen walked over, bumping chests and clapping with these warriors. His voice was deep and powerful, and the surrounding people all showed their respect and submission to him. Lu Chen clearly saw this from the side, and could feel that Huoyen indeed had great prestige in this tribe. Previously, when the Black Fire tribe was ambushed by the Divine Wood tribe, although they suffered a great loss and even lost their camp on the way back, the tribe's vitality was not damaged, and the elite warriors were almost all alive. In this kind of situation, if Huoyen was also in the tribe with his command, it would be hard to say who would win or lose. It was clear that Lu Chen was not the only one who had such thoughts. Many of the barbarian warriors had also mentioned this matter to Huoyen when he walked past them. Their faces were filled with anger and unwillingness. Huoyen silently nodded, but didn't say anything and just continued walking forward. And Lu Chen, who had been following behind Huoyen, also attracted many strange gazes. But after the previous incident at the Black Fire tribe's camp, these barbarians looked at Lu Chen with a much more relaxed gaze. Walking through the crowd and into the depths of the cave, he saw two people coming from behind the crowd. They were Huoyen's two relatives. His son, Huaying, was supporting the current chief of the Black Fire tribe who was also his father, Huahu. "Father." Huoyen walked in front of Huahu and called out. Flaming Tiger looked at his son, and a trace of gratification flashed across his face. He nodded and said, "It's good that you're back." As he spoke, his gaze swept past Huoyen's back. When he saw Lu Chen and the intact fire god's staff in his hand, he seemed to be startled for a moment. At the same time, a haze flashed across the depths of his eyes. Huoyen's return made the people of the Black Fire tribe happy and excited. The atmosphere in the tribe was obviously much higher. Many people cast their gazes over. Although they didn't shout, there was still a very strong and obvious expectation. As for what this expectation was, it was self-evident. However, no matter what it was, the core members of the clan had to sit down and discuss it. Basically, it was Huoyen's family. As one of the privileges of the patriarch, Flaming Tiger occupied the best and driest place in this underground cave. The people around him automatically moved aside, and with the help of the Fire Hawk, Flaming Tiger sat down again. He seemed to be panting a little. Yin frowned and also sat down in front of the two of them. He looked at his father with a trace of worry on his face and said, "Father, are you all right?" Flaming Tiger forced a smile and said, "That day when we were running for our lives I was tired for a while. I'm much better now." Then his gaze turned to the person beside Yin. As if he didn't care about the surprised and complicated gazes of the surrounding Black Fire Tribe members, he directly sat down beside Yin and openly joined the discussion of the highest core members of the Black Fire Tribe, Luchin. Flaming Tiger's expression was a little unhappy, but Yin seemed to ignore it. Moreover, he felt that Luchin sitting down was a matter of course. However, this infuriated another hot-tempered youth. Flaming Eagle stood up and said angrily, "What right does this damn human have to sit here? Do you believe that I won't kill you with one strike?" Luchin's expression was indifferent. There was no joy or sorrow on his face. He only glanced at the angry brute youth and didn't say anything. Meanwhile, Yin, who was sitting beside Luchin, said in a low voice, "Flaming Eagle, sit down." Flaming Eagle seemed to be somewhat afraid of his father. Although his anger didn't decrease after hearing this, he still sat down hatefully. However, he still stayed close to his grandfather, Flaming Tiger, and faintly felt that he was confronting his father, Yin. Flaming Tiger looked coldly at the two people in front of him. A barbarian and a human, just sitting together like this as if there was no gap between them, and their calm and composed appearance made him feel that it was particularly irritating. He looked at Yin and said, "What's going on? Tell me." Yin didn't beat around the bush and said straightforwardly, "These days I brought Luchin to the fire god's altar. In the holy land of the altar, Luchin has already received the recognition and blessing of the fire god, and obtained the great power of the god's inheritance. Now he is the priest of our Black Fire Tribe, and in the future he will guide our tribe to rise and become strong again." He didn't deliberately lower his voice. When he said these words in a loud and clear voice, apart from Flaming Tiger and Flaming Eagle, many of the surrounding barbarians of the Black Fire Tribe who were paying attention to what was happening heard at the same time. Suddenly there was an uproar. Everyone's faces were filled with astonishment, and it was obvious that they couldn't accept this result for a moment. Impossible. Flaming Eagle was the first to roar, and once again stood up suddenly. Yin also stood up, but he didn't make any move against his son in front of him. He only glanced at him and then turned around to look at the surroundings. Facing the gazes of the many clansmen, he said in a clear voice, "The long-lost divine weapon, the fire god's staff, has now been reunited in the hands of Luchin. This is the best proof that the fire god has recognized him." There was another round of clamor and discussion, but it quickly quieted down. Most of the Black Fire clansmen still had expressions of shock and disbelief on their faces, but when they looked at Luchin, there was an inexplicable sense of intimacy in their gazes. Is that the person chosen by the supreme fire god? As if responding to Yin's words, the fire god's scepter suddenly flickered and brightened. A dazzling brilliance lit up from the scepter. It was as dazzling as the sun, causing one to feel reverence when looking at it. After a while, suddenly from the dazzling brilliance, a ball of flame suddenly soared up, rushed into the air, burned fiercely. The entire cave people felt a wave of heat instantly hit their faces, and the ancient aura contained in it was even more powerful to the point that it made people tremble. In an instant, under the deep-rooted worship and reverence, almost all of the Black Fire Tribe members knelt down. Their eyes were brimming with tears, and they bowed respectfully, cheering and praising the fire god. Hu and Huaying, on the other hand, had expressions of shock on their faces. They did not kneel down, but neither did they reprimand him. On the contrary, Yin, who was standing at the side, had a strange expression on his face. He looked at the fire god's staff as if he wanted to say something but stopped himself. This conversation did not reach any conclusion, and ended because of the fire god's staff's radiance. Although Luchin's identity was a little strange in the Black Fire Tribe, the fire god was an overwhelming power, not to mention that he had the support of the tribe's chief warrior, Yin. It was also from this day onwards that Luchin officially made his debut in the Black Fire Tribe. However, when they left, Yin and Luchin walked side by side. Taking advantage of the fact that there was no one nearby, Yin lowered his voice and asked Luchin, "I say, among the power passed down by the fire god, isn't the most powerful black fire?" Luchin smiled as he looked to his left and right, his expression unchanged. He also lowered his voice and said, "You're right. Then why did you suddenly create that flashy but impractical white light? Because this is the best way to deceive these idiots. If you use black fire they might not even understand," Luchin said. Yin was furious, but then his expression stiffened and he fell silent. After a long while, he shook his head and smiled bitterly. He sighed and did not say anything else. After Huiyin returned to the tribe, many people in the Black Fire tribe seemed to have suddenly found a pillar of support, and their spirits rose. This was especially obvious among the barbarian warriors. Many of them could feel it, including the patriarch of the barbarian race, Huahu. And since Huiyin had returned, the most important thing was to understand the matter of the Divine Wood tribe's sneak attack, and how to respond. In fact, the most important person to respond to this matter should be the chief, but the atmosphere in the Black Fire tribe seemed to be a little strange. Huiyin's question seemed to be a matter of course, and the people beside him did not object. The beginning and the course of this matter were quickly laid out in front of Huiyin and Lu Chen. The matter was not complicated. The situation was that one day, the Divine Wood tribe suddenly took advantage of the darkness to launch a sneak attack on the Black Fire camp. There was no warning beforehand, and there was almost no conflict between the two tribes. The people of the Black Fire tribe did not expect the Divine Wood tribe to make such a move, so they were caught unprepared. However, among the 5 tribes of the wasteland, the Black Fire tribe's warriors had always been at the highest level. It was just that the tribe did not have the most people, so their overall strength was only in the middle. The Divine Wood tribe had many people, but the battle strength of their warriors could not compare to that of the Black Fire tribe. So after this battle, although the Black Fire tribe was defeated, their losses were not great. But in the end they had lost their base and it was still a very embarrassing matter. Huiyin listened to this matter with a sullen face. There were a few tribal warriors who reported this matter, including Iron Bear, whom Lu Chen had seen before, and Black Bull, whom he had seen outside the passage. Seeing how close they were to Huiyin, it was obvious that they were Huiyin's trusted aides. After listening, Huiyin looked at these people with a cold face. These strong barbarian warriors looked at each other, all of them looking a little embarrassed. Huiyin snorted coldly and said, "The warriors of the Divine Wood tribe are all trash. You were actually chased here by those trash. After everything was settled, why didn't you rush back and chop them to death?" The abnormally tall and sturdy Iron Bear raised his eyes and said, "We also thought about it." It was Lu Chen who interrupted and asked calmly, "From what you're saying, someone stopped you from taking revenge." Iron Bear curled his lips and glanced at Lu Chen. "That's right." Chapter 313. Huiyin naturally didn't take these words seriously when he said that his tribe's warriors had been chased away by trash. It was most likely something he said out of anger. He forgot what he said, so Tai Xiong, Heinyo, and the others didn't take it to heart. However, Lu Chen's question hit the nail on the head. Huiyan's expression changed and became ugly. After a while he said, "What did father say?" When Huiyin wasn't in the tribe, there was only one person who could stop these hot-blooded, fierce, and brave warriors. There was no need to guess. Could only be the chief Huahu. Tai Xiong and Heinyo looked at each other with a strange expression on their faces. Lu Chen looked at them from the side. After a while, Heinyo opened his mouth and laughed dryly. The chief said that this matter happened in a hurry and the people's hearts aren't stable. Everything will be discussed after you return. Huiyin was stunned for a moment. Soon after, an expression that didn't know whether to laugh or cry appeared on his face. In the end, he looked at Lu Chen and said with a bitter smile, "Then I'll go find father to discuss this." Tai Xiong and Heinyo turned around and left, leaving only Lu Chen and Huiyin. Huiyin looked at Lu Chen and said, "Come with me." Lu Chen said, "Your father and your son don't seem to like me very much. Are you sure you want me to go with you?" Huiyin hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath and said, "You are already our tribe's priest. In the future there will be a time when we will meet or fight. You might as well take this opportunity to make things clear and avoid future troubles." Lu Chen calmly nodded as if he didn't care much about this matter. Instead, he looked at Huiyin and said, "How do you plan to deal with this matter?" "Of course we will take revenge." Huiyin said without hesitation, "In the northern wasteland, if you take a step back, others will take a step forward. If you are a bit weaker, others will be more ruthless. Moreover, if we don't do anything, those clansmen who died in the camp will have died in vain." Lu Chen grunted and said, "It's good that you've made up your mind." Huiyin turned his head to look at him. Seeing that there was no one around, he inched closer without batting an eyelid. "Do you have confidence in this battle?" Lu Chen smiled and said, "If what you said on the way here is true, as long as I go over to help, we will definitely win this battle." Huiyin was instantly overjoyed, but after the joy he still did not dare to completely believe it. He said in a low voice, "Really? Why are you so confident? Lu Qin spat and jokingly scolded, I don't want to do this job, but you desperately want to drag me down with you. Now that I'm on the pirate ship, I have no choice but to help you, and you still don't believe me? If I say it's possible, then it's definitely possible. What's with all this nonsense? Huoyan laughed heartily, his expression carefree and joyful as he strode forward. Lu Qin followed beside him and said, But how are you so sure that your father will agree to your suggestion? Huoyan waved his hand and smiled, You don't understand. My father handed this matter to me a long time ago. Oh, that's good, Lu Qin said with a smile. About an hour later, Huoyan and Lu Qin once again left the residence of the Black Fire Tribe's chief, Huahu. But this time, the expressions on both of their faces were a little strange. Lu Qin was a little surprised and a little amused, while Huoyan's face was ashen, looking angry and annoyed. As he walked, the Black Fire Tribe's clansmen all avoided him, not daring to provoke this burly chief warrior. When the two of them walked to a secluded area with no one around, Lu Qin said lightly, What do you mean? Huoyan suddenly let out a low roar and suddenly punched the stone wall beside him, causing a large amount of sand to fall. At the same time he gritted his teeth and said, Stupid, stupid. How could my father be so stupid? Whether he's stupid or not, there's nothing more to say. Now that the chief doesn't agree to send out troops for revenge, what do you plan to do? Lu Qin stood beside Huoyan and said with a calm expression, By the way, I've always thought that you were the one who could make the final decision in the Black Fire Tribe when we made the deal in the sacrificial altar sacred land. With the current situation, even if the two of us have the ability to reach the heavens, if we really want to strengthen the Black Fire Tribe, won't we? Huoyan snorted and said, My father has been the chief for many years. He knows all the rules of the wasteland. He must have a reason for doing this. Lu Qin said, Then what is the reason? Please tell me. Huoyan was speechless. Lu Qin shrugged and said, In any case, I'm not in a hurry. Do as you see fit. As he said this, he found a clean spot by the wall and sat down. Black Wolf Atsu, who had always been following him, also laid down beside him. Lu Qin stroked the fur on Atu's head and back, then quickly closed his eyes. Huoyan stared at him for a while, then suddenly stamped his feet and went back to Huahu's residence. In the next 2 hours, many people of the Black Fire Tribe heard the fiercest quarrel between the two of them in history. The quarrel was deafening and chaotic. This quarrel suddenly stopped at the last moment. Huoyan seemed to have reached the limit of his patience. He strode out of the house and shouted at the people around him. Following which, a large group of tribal warriors arrived at Huoyan's side almost instantaneously, surrounding him. On the other side, Fire Tiger also walked out. However, he looked much older than before. In fact, he looked even older than he was not long ago. This pair of father and son glared angrily at each other. A choice was immediately placed in the hands of all the people of the Black Fire Tribe, especially in the hands of the fierce and valiant barbarian warriors. In the end, this quarrel did not really come to a conclusion. Because on that day when the two of them confronted each other, everyone in the Black Fire Tribe saw that almost every barbarian warrior spontaneously stood behind Huoyan. And on Huahu's side, only his grandson Huaying rushed over and tightly supported his grandfather. Then, with a sad look in his eyes, he wanted to help his grandfather back. Huoyan stood in the crowd with a similarly ugly expression. There was also a trace of sadness. But he quickly put aside these thoughts and walked to Lu Qin's side. Lu Qin was resting with his eyes closed, but in reality he was not really asleep. So he quickly stood up and nodded to Huoyan, saying, You are probably the only one in the world who can confront the barbarian tribe's leader like this, right? Huoyan coldly snorted and said, My father will no longer care about this sneak attack. However, we have already made an agreement. If you are unable to help me this time, then it is impossible for you to continue staying in the tribe. Lu Qin laughed, but his eyes revealed a trace of contempt. Then he lightly said, I have already told you this battle is basically a sure win. But since I have agreed to help you make the Black Fire Tribe strong, then there are some things that I have to do. What is it? Huoyan asked. Don't kill everyone like you did in the city. Lu Qin sighed, saying, The number of barbarians in the north is already too little. If you want to achieve a faster result, then you naturally have to use some extreme methods. Chapter 3:14. What method? Huoyan's eyes showed some doubt, looking at Lu Qin suspiciously. Lu Qin had no intention of hiding it from him. He beckoned Huoyan to come to his side, and the two of them whispered for a while. Then Huoyan's expression changed, looking unusually ugly. He shook his head saying, "This won't do." Lu Chen asked, "Why?" Huiyin said, "You are a human, so you don't understand the customs of the barbarians of the wilderness. No one has ever done this before." Lu Chen said lightly, "In the past, no tribe has ever been so weak and still dreamed of restoring the glory of their ancestors, right?" Huiyin was momentarily stunned, unable to speak for a moment. Lu Chen looked at him and said, "You asked me to help you and I promised I will do my best. Now that the Black Fire tribe is in such a situation, it will be very difficult to revive it. It is inevitable to use some rare methods and take a new path." Huiyin still did not nod in agreement, only sitting next to Lu Chen with his back against the stone wall. From afar, people would occasionally glance at the two of them. One was a burly and fierce barbarian, and the other was a reserved, gloomy, and indifferent human. Their appearances were worlds apart, but for some reason when the two sat together, there was a strange sense of harmony. After a while, Huiyin said in a low voice, "Is there no other way?" Lu Chen said, "There are other ways, it's not that there aren't any." Huiyan's spirit was immediately lifted, saying, "Let's hear it." Lu Chen said, "Then we'll follow the rules of the tribes in this wasteland. We'll quietly develop and have children. We'll take it 1 year at a time, one battle at a time. With my help, dealing with these small tribes shouldn't be a problem. We'll basically be able to defeat them. But the Black Fire tribe only has a small population. Even if you are given a large territory, you won't have anyone to guard it, right? So I think in 30 to 50 years, when the tribe's population has increased, the Black Fire tribe will be able to control the northern border wilderness. And then? You still have the ambition to restore the glory of your ancestors when they were at their peak?" Lu Chen looked at Huiyin and said calmly, "According to what you've told me, the territory in the south is 100 times larger than here, and the population of the most powerful tribes is almost 10 times that of the Black Fire tribe. Then what should we do? Let's continue to reproduce. We'll wait for about 100 or 200 years. If there are no natural or man-made disasters under the protection of the Fire God, and there are no attacks from other tribes, and everything is perfect without any mistakes, then when the population of the tribe increases and the number of warriors is enough to fight with those big tribes, maybe we can compete with them. But when that time comes, both of us won't be around anymore, right?" Lu Chen continued to describe the beautiful vision of the Black Fire tribe. Huiyin was nodding his head slightly at first, but the more he listened, the uglier his expression became. When he heard the last few words, 100 or 200 years, his entire face darkened. Lu Chen smiled at him and said, "You're unhappy, aren't you? You're not willing, are you?" Then he deliberately pointed at Huiyin and said, "You see, although you're a barbarian and I'm a human, our thoughts are the same. You have the ambition, you want to make contributions, you want to become a hero of the Black Fire tribe. Why should you be a stepping stone for others? If that's the case, who will remember you? And even if you're willing, I won't do it." Lu Chen finally said calmly, "I plan to return to the north alive. If we really want to waste our time and die here, then we'll just turn against each other now." Deep into the night, dark clouds covered the stars. On the desolate plains, a group of people and horses quietly advanced under the cover of the night. Huiyin and Lu Chen walked at the front of this group of ferocious barbarian warriors. Even further in front of them, in the deep darkness of the night, there was a group of black shadows moving silently in the night. 2 dark green lights flashed in the shadows. That was the Black Wolf Atsu. Huiyin looked at the abnormally agile shadow in front of him, his expression somewhat complicated in the darkness. After a while, he said to Lu Chen, "This monster of yours seems to be somewhat different." This time Lu Chen's clothes were not the same as before. His original clothes were gone, and in its place was a completely black, ancient-looking black robe. Even half of his head was covered by a hood, looking a little strange. After hearing Huiyin's words, he casually said, "Echem? What's different?" Huiyin shook his head and said, "It's too human-like. Ordinary demonic beasts are basically unable to do this. However, in the past, I've heard from the elders in the tribe that there seem to be similar strange demonic beasts in those large tribes." Lu Chen's eyes flashed and he asked, "What kind of monsters are there in the big tribes?" Huiyin thought for a while and said, "I can't say for sure, I've actually never seen it with my own eyes. But I heard that those especially powerful, especially human-like and intelligent monsters are usually under the command of the most powerful shaman venerable. Most people call them holy beasts." Lu Chen's footsteps slightly paused, then he said, "If only the Atsu was really a holy beast." Huiyin laughed and said, "That's right." Lu Chen immediately changed the topic, pointing at the black robe he was wearing and said, "Must I wear this robe of yours?" Hui Yin immediately nodded and said, "Yes, this is the only priest robe that has been passed down from the ancestors of our Black Fire tribe. This is the tribe's rule." "Rule?" Lu Chen looked at him and said, "The matter that we talked about when we came out, have you thought about it?" Hui Yin was silent for a while, then said, "Yes, we'll do as you say. But before that we have to at least win this battle." Lu Chen had a faint smile on his face, nodded and said, "Don't worry." Hui Yin also seemed to feel a little awkward, and after a dry cough he said, "I feel that the Divine Wood tribe's base was not damaged after the sneak attack. They should be on guard these days." Lu Chen said, "I also feel that they should be on guard. But so many days have passed, they can't be on guard every day, they will eventually relax a little. Moreover, we can win tonight's battle without a sneak attack." Hui Yin took a deep breath and said, "Why are you always so confident?" Lu Chen grinned and said, "Don't you believe that the fire god is protecting you?" "I believe." Hui Yin was obviously stunned for a moment, and finally replied in a muffled voice. For this long-distance attack, the Black Fire tribe did not send out all their warriors, but those who were able to come out were all elite warriors who had experienced hundreds of battles. It would not be an exaggeration to say that they were the strongest fighting force of the Black Fire tribe so far. After experiencing the humiliation of being ambushed and having to flee in panic, these Black Fire warriors were all eager to fight. They did not have the slightest fear of entering deep into the Divine Wood tribe's lair. Instead, many people's gazes swept over the two figures at the front from time to time. When they looked at Hui Yin, their gazes were filled with respect and trust, but when they looked at Lu Chen, their gazes were complicated with a hint of suspicion. Before they set off, Lu Chen had already asked Hui Yin to gather these warriors together, and then he did some of the work that a tribal priest should do. It was just that he, a human, was playing tricks on them, and these Black Fire tribe warriors did not seem to feel any sense of security. At least, they did not feel the strong fighting spirit and power that the fire god was supposed to convey through the priest. This matter made everyone feel a little uneasy, but Lu Chen did not care. After all, he was just fooling around with these ferocious-looking but simple-minded people. He had no choice but to do this after Hui Yin strongly urged him to. According to Hui Yin, it was fine if there were no priests in the barbarian tribe, but as long as there were priests, they would definitely invite the priests to perform a big ceremony like going to war. Otherwise, the entire tribe would not feel at ease. But one of the consequences of this was that no one seemed to feel the legendary ancestral power. Logically speaking, when the legendary priest was around, shouldn't the ancestral power shine upon everyone? Or could it be that the human priest and the ancestors of the barbarian tribe were not on the same page, so the ancestors of the Black Fire tribe simply ignored this matter? Lu Chen was calm and collected as if nothing had happened. The warriors of the Black Fire tribe looked at each other and did not dare to say anything. After all, that was the messenger of the fire god, the tribal priest. Moreover, the Black Fire tribe had lost their priest for hundreds of years, and no one was particularly clear about the specific situation back then. What if they were wrong? In short, such a group of people came out in such a muddle-headed manner. Although they were a little uneasy, their fighting spirit was still high as they charged towards the old lair of the Divine Wood tribe. They did not know how long they had advanced like this, until the figure of Atsu, who had merged with the darkness, suddenly stopped and let out a few low howls. Only then did the Black Fire tribe's troops suddenly stop. In the distance ahead, a camp appeared under the sky. The houses were faintly discernible, and there were some torches burning in the darkness, emitting light. They should be the warriors of the Divine Wood tribe who were on night watch. Hui Yin turned his head to look at Lu Chen, and then waved his hands to both sides. After a moment, all the warriors of the Black Fire tribe behind them quietly spread out, forming a long line, quietly lurking in the night, and then pulled out their respective blades. The night was silent, and the murderous aura condensed like frost, as if it could chill one's heart. Lu Chen, on the other hand, looked at the shadow of the tribe in the distance and took a deep breath. After a moment, a black shadow walked to Lu Chen's side. It was Atsu, who had appeared like a ghost. Its green eyes seemed to have sensed something, and revealed a rare cold and bloodthirsty emotion. Under the black robe, Lu Chen slowly stretched out his arm, and an invisible wave of air suddenly appeared in front of his chest. After a moment, the Vulcan staff appeared in his hand. He held the staff, moved forward, and pointed at the camp of the Divine Wood tribe. At that moment, a wind suddenly blew over the wilderness. The cold wind blew, as if a demon that had been sleeping for many years had finally awakened. In the dark sky, it stared at the creatures below, revealing a ferocious and silent grin. Chapter 315. As one of the 5 largest tribes in the north of the wilderness, the Divine Wood tribe actually had a larger population than the Blackfire tribe. Therefore, the scale of their camp was slightly larger than that of the Blackfire tribe. In fact, among the 5 northern tribes, the Mountain Spirit tribe and the Thunder Lizard tribe had the largest population, while the Divine Wood tribe ranked 3rd. As for the Blackfire tribe, they ranked 4th, and there was not much difference between them and the Ghost Fox tribe. However, despite their small population, the Blackfire tribe's combat power had long been considered to be above that of the Divine Wood tribe. It was second only to the Mountain Spirit tribe and the Thunder Lizard tribe. From this, it could be seen that the warriors of the Blackfire tribe were actually quite fierce. It was precisely because of this that the Divine Wood tribe's surprise attack had caught the Blackfire tribe unprepared and made many warriors of the Blackfire tribe feel humiliated. That night, the cold night wind swept across the land of the wilderness, blowing all the way to the camp of the Divine Wood tribe. The burning torches swayed in the wind and danced in a somewhat frenzied manner, emitting flickering afterimages in the darkness like twisting and convulsing snakes. The warriors on night watch were a little tired and shrank their bodies in the cold wind. Even the strong barbarians would feel uncomfortable in the cold night of the wilderness. Until the sound of the wind suddenly grew louder, suddenly turning into a sharp whistling sound in the pitch-black ice-cold night. The warriors guarding the gate of the Divine Wood tribe suddenly raised their heads and looked forward. But before they could react, the shrill, ear-piercing shriek had already cut through the deathly silence of the night and arrived before their eyes. It was as if a light had suddenly lit up in the darkness. It was the sinister grin of a death god, revealing its sharp fangs that glowed with white light. Terrifying sharp blades rushed over, and in the next instant, there was a muffled sound that made one's entire body tremble. A Divine Wood warrior's body was directly sent flying, and on his body, a giant axe had directly chopped into his face. Blood splattered, and the unlucky guy was almost split in half. The warriors of the Divine Wood tribe on both sides turned pale with fright. They immediately roared in anger, but their anger was soon covered by even more vigorous and ferocious shouts. In the darkness of the night, a row of tall and ferocious warriors charged out. Perhaps there weren't that many of them, but in the darkness, they were like raging waves rolling up a violent wave. Amidst the blood-boiling roars in the bone-chilling cold wind, they crashed down. The leader was the most muscular and powerful Huoyan. Like a raging wave, this group of black flame warriors instantly swept over and rushed to the entrance of the Divine Wood tribe. Huoyan laughed sinisterly as he pulled out the giant axe from the corpse. Cries of alarm and screams rose and fell in the surroundings. Blood splashed and a few more corpses appeared on the ground. In the camp of the Divine Wood tribe further away, the alarm had already resounded throughout the entire camp. No matter what, the Divine Wood tribe was a barbarian tribe that lived in the harsh northern wastelands. Those who could survive in such a place were not weaklings. Therefore, in a short period of time visible to the naked eye, torches were quickly lit in the Divine Wood tribe despite being ambushed. Then more and more barbarian warriors swarmed over. Some were holding weapons while others were not even dressed properly. It was obvious that they had just woken up from their sleep. But at a glance, everyone's faces were filled with anger and ferocity. Perhaps there was panic but not much fear. The valiant nature of the barbarians could be said to be completely revealed. It's the people of the Black Flame tribe. An angry roar came from the crowd. It was obvious that someone from the Divine Wood tribe had already recognized the identity of the invading enemy. This roar caused a commotion, but more warriors continued to roar and charge over. Looking at the number of people, the people from the Divine Wood tribe were much more than the warriors from the Blackfire tribe. After all, this was their nest. But from Huoyan onwards, none of the warriors from the Blackfire tribe showed any signs of fear. Instead, they continued to roar and charge forward. Although they had fewer people, they seemed to erupt with an aura that was not any weaker than the opposite side. Seeing that a bloody battle was about to unfold in this harsh and calamitous wasteland, a black figure slowly stepped out from the shadows behind the Blackfire tribe warriors. It was as if he had become one with the darkness. It had been like this since the beginning of time, to the point that the fire god's staff in his hand had even overshadowed his existence. It emitted a strange light in mid-air, and then the twisted totem carvings slowly lit up. In the darkness, he began to chant a mysterious incantation in a low voice. The ancient aura descended from the night sky, like a god or a devil, staring at the crowd. As if there was a response in the crowd, Huoyan's body suddenly stopped, and then he raised his head towards the sky and roared. His voice was so shrill and loud that no matter if it was friend or foe, everyone was shocked and looked towards him. The tall and sturdy barbarian with the huge axe in his hand suddenly faced upwards and roared. Then, a strange rune suddenly lit up in the middle of his forehead. It flickered with a strange radiance. A moment later, a black flame suddenly rose from the center of the rune with a whoosh. It seemed as if a demon was roaring at the world. Ka 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 ka. A strange sound that caused one's scalp to turn numb rang out from Hui Yan's body. Under the madly dancing black flames, the originally ferocious and wild barbarian's entire body suddenly expanded. All of his muscles seemed to have exploded and swelled to more than double their original size. Green veins popped out, making him look like a barbarian giant that no one had ever seen before. His face that had become especially ferocious also looked like a demon at this moment. His eyes flickered with a bloodthirsty light, and the only feeling he had was power. Incomparably powerful power. He roared at the sky as if there was nothing in this world that could stop him. Then he roared and rushed forward. The darkness and the night wind all retreated, revealing the Divine Wood tribe members who had a look of shock on their faces. Witchcraft. A sharp and fearful voice suddenly rang out from the crowd of the Godwood tribe. They were not afraid of blood, sharp blades, or even death. However, it was as if all of them were innately awed by the legendary and mysterious witchcraft. Even their voices trembled as they screamed. On the other hand, the Black Fire tribe was full of fighting spirit. Many warriors even turned around to look. Then they, including the people of the Divine Wood tribe who had also sensed something, saw a scene that they would never forget for the rest of their lives. A black shadow floated in the air behind them. Darkness gathered from all directions, so dense that it was almost unimaginable, and wrapped around the shadow-like person. A brilliant light flickered in the darkness, and in the center of the light was a staff. The totem rune shone with a dazzling light. Then, in that instant, the entire staff suddenly shot out an indescribably huge black flame. The black flame burned the sky as if it was going to burn the night. At the same time, when the black flame shot out, the warriors of the Black Fire tribe on the ground all trembled, and then they roared in anger. Then, the strange phenomenon that happened to Hui Yan also happened to them. Under the night sky, the warriors of the Black Fire tribe all seemed to have turned into ferocious and terrifying demons. Strange totem runes flickered on their foreheads and black flames spewed out of their mouths. Then they sneered and roared as they rushed into the crowd of Divine Wood tribe. Bright red blood seemed to be the main color of the night from the beginning. When the dripping blood spurted out from the body, it was accompanied by terrifying screams and crazed roars filled with killing intent. Not only did the bodies of the Black Fire warriors become larger after being strengthened by the strange Black Fire witchcraft, their strength also skyrocketed. Many of them had clearly not experienced this before, and many of them were not familiar with this feeling, so they were not very proficient in their movements. However, this didn't affect the outcome of the battle at all. Apart from their strength, their bodies were also several times tougher than before under the blessing of the Black Flames. Although the barbarian warriors of the Divine Wood tribe were greatly frightened, they still bravely rushed forward, and fought with the Black Fire warriors that looked like ferocious beasts. But very quickly they discovered that most of their weapons were unable to cause any damage to the Black Fire warriors, while the beastified or demonized Black Fire warriors could easily kill their opponents. Some of the Berserk warriors even threw away their weapons and used their bare hands to tear apart the barbarian warriors that they were fighting. From the beginning of the battle, especially after the Black Fire witchcraft was cast, it suddenly became a one-sided massacre. There were still people in the Divine Wood tribe who were stubbornly resisting, but they were still forced to retreat. But at this moment, someone shouted from the crowd, hold on a little longer. This witchcraft can't last for too long." The warriors of the Divine Wood tribe who were resisting with their lives seemed to have their spirits lifted, as if they had seen a life-saving straw. They resisted with all their might, while the Black Fire warriors that were attacking and slaughtering did not react at all. Perhaps only the strongest and most ferocious of them, Hui Yan, looked back after smashing an enemy in front of him to death with a roar. That dark shadow was still floating in the dark night sky, hidden in the darkness. No one could see his face or figure clearly. But amidst that strange and terrifying aura, a dark shadow slowly extended from the sky. Gradually, it swept past like a dark cloud, covering a large part of the Divine Wood tribe's camp. The light gradually dissipated, and a cold gaze looked down from the clouds. In the depths of those eyes, there were dark flames burning fiercely. In the darkness, he stretched out his hand and pointed at the crowd below. Thus, a cold wind blew and the wind and clouds swirled. Dark demons swept through the sky, whistling down. Chapter 316. Fire was the source of light in the world. It was something that illuminated the darkness. It was warmth, hope, and the beginning of all living things. Even when the flame was burning, it was still warm, bright, and scorching. And if one day the flame turned black, no longer bright, no longer warm, and even cold, what would happen? On this day, the barbarians of the Divine Wood tribe in the northern wilderness saw the result. Darkness engulfed the sky and the earth, pressing down heavily. It surrounded the entire tribe's campsite with the aura of a legendary demon. Then, in the mournful whistling of the night wind, in the depths of the endless darkness, in the shadows that seemed to have solidified, there was suddenly something strange twisting and shaking. Then it slowly took shape from the darkness, twisting and stepping out. It was a monster that was completely black. It was neither a ferocious demon beast nor was it a stone puppet. It looked to be several dozen meters tall and could barely be considered a human. However, it had 4 heads and 8 arms. Each face was different, but all of them were ferocious, like an evil spirit. Once the strange demon stepped out of the darkness, the entire Divine Wood tribe camp immediately fell into a solemn and deathly silence. Not only did the people of the Divine Wood tribe retreat in fear, even the witchcraft-demonized warriors of the Black Fire tribe were shocked. Only Hui Yen, who was in the crowd, suddenly had a flash of ecstasy in his eyes after his body trembled. Compared to the other tribal warriors, he had been raised as the successor of the tribe since he was a child. Naturally, he knew more about the history and matters of the Black Fire tribe. The terrifying monster in front of him was a terrifying monster that was summoned by the incomparably powerful shaman during the most powerful era of the Black Fire tribe thousands of years ago. It was called the Shadow Devil. The nature of the Shadow Devil was actually similar to the stone puppet that the Mountain Spirit tribe shaman had summoned, but in terms of combat power and ferocity, it was far superior to the stone puppet. It was one of the most terrifying creatures summoned by witchcraft in the history of the southern wilderness. Hui Yen had never thought that a human like Lu Qin, who seemed to have just received the inheritance of the fire god, and whose cultivation and strength were not too strong, would be able to suddenly summon such a powerful shadow devil. It was no wonder that this human man was so unbelievably confident before the battle began. Thinking of this, Hui Yen felt the blood in his body boil, as if in that instant he really saw the hope of reviving his tribe. He fiercely turned around and roared at the enemies in front of him. Waving his giant axe, he charged forward, killing everything in his path. This immediately alerted the surrounding comrades. The warriors of the Black Fire tribe roared out in anger and started killing. Immediately, blood flowed like a river, turning the Divine Wood tribe's camp into a terrifying purgatory. At the same time, when everyone's attention was attracted by the shadow demon, the black shadow in the sky silently descended and landed on the ground outside the Divine Wood tribe's camp. In the darkness, as soon as Lu Chen's feet touched the ground, he suddenly felt his legs go soft. He staggered forward and almost fell to the ground. Fortunately, at this time, a black shadow suddenly sprang out from the darkness. It was the black wolf Atsu who directly used its back to support Lu Chen. The Vulcan staff fell on the yellow ground with a "pah" sound. Lu Chen lay on Atsu's body, his face pale as he gasped for breath. After a while, he seemed to be able to catch his breath and let out a long sigh. Atsu looked back at Lu Chen worriedly and called out in a low voice. Lu Chen forced a smile at it, then sat on the ground. After panting a few more times, he opened his mouth and said, "This damned witchcraft, I don't know where it came from. Even a slightly more powerful witchcraft seems to take my life." Atsu's huge head leaned over and rubbed against Lu Chen's chest, but it didn't seem to know what to do. After a while it lay down beside Lu Chen. Lu Chen looked at the black wolf with a trace of warmth in his eyes. He reached out and gently patted its head, then raised his head to look at the battlefield below. After the terrifying shadow demon joined the battlefield, the Divine Wood tribe's desperate resistance instantly collapsed. Almost no one could resist this terrifying demon, especially when a few of the bravest and strongest Divine Wood tribe warriors rushed forward but were caught by a single palm. Then they were torn apart and killed in front of everyone. All the Divine Wood tribe barbarians seemed to have completely collapsed. No one dared to resist anymore. Everyone was fleeing in fear. The outcome of this battle was completely determined, and it was only a matter of time before it ended. Lu Chen retracted his gaze. Taking advantage of the fact that there was no one around, he casually leaned on Atsu's back and muttered. Then he said in a low voice, "How is this a fire god? It's obviously a death god." The Black Fire tribe's surprise attack on the Divine Wood tribe was a complete victory during the night. However, the final battle only ended at daybreak. There weren't many battles in the later stages. Instead, it was more about the Divine Wood tribe that were almost driven mad by fear. The shadow demon disappeared not long after the outcome of the battle was decided. To be honest, this terrifying demon actually didn't kill too many people. However, its terrifying power was unparalleled, and it was a decisive force that influenced the outcome of the battle. At daybreak, the Black Fire tribe barbarian warriors led by Hou Yen were no longer in a state of enchantment. All of them returned to their normal appearances. But even so, the completely defeated Divine Wood tribe could no longer put up any resistance. Unlike the sneak attack on the Black Fire tribe, the Divine Wood tribe suffered a heavy blow this time. The tribe's camp was in a mess. Blood flowed like a river and corpses and broken limbs could be seen everywhere. Among the survivors, not many managed to escape. In fact, most of the surviving Divine Wood tribe members were intercepted by the warriors of the Black Fire tribe. When the first ray of sunlight fell from the sky, the remaining barbarians of the Divine Wood tribe were gathered in a corner of the camp. Around them were ferocious-looking barbarian warriors of the Black Fire tribe. Their eyes were ferocious, and the blades and axes in their hands were still wet with blood. A little further away was the land of carnage. Who knew how many lives had been lost there? The originally thriving tribe's camp was now in ruins. Houses and walls had collapsed, and many places still had traces of being burnt. The morning breeze carried a strong smell of blood that made people want to vomit. In the sky above the tribe's camp, there were already a few vultures and a large flock of crows circling in the air, cawing as they smelled the blood. It was in such a hellish scene that Lu Qin, who was wearing a black robe with his face hidden in a deep hood, slowly walked into the already fallen tribe's camp with the huge black wolf Atsu by his side. The black robe seemed to block out all the light. Even though it was daytime, no one could see the face of this human male clearly. But Atsu, who stood beside him, attracted everyone's attention. That ferocious beast's appearance was a perfect foil to this terrifying shaman's aura. There was no longer any doubt in the eyes of the warriors of the Black Fire tribe. Everyone, even the most ferocious and valiant warriors, were filled with reverence in front of this black-robed priest. They respectfully made way for him. Lu Qin silently walked forward, calmly treating all the reverence and fear in the surroundings. Under his feet, he crossed the river of blood. Then he left bloody footprints on the road, all the way to the Divine Wood tribe's captives. "Priest, it's the priest," terrified, soft voices came from the captives. There were many women, children, and elderly among the captives of the Godwood tribe, as well as many adult men. Even the patriarch of the Godwood tribe was not dead yet. He had only lost an arm, and as a form of treatment that was different from the other tribesmen, he was tied with an extra rope and thrown in front of the crowd in a rough manner. At this moment, he stared at the black-robed priest with his eyes wide open. His face was filled with disbelief. But whether it was Lu Qin or the other warriors of the Black Fire tribe, no one paid attention to him. Hou Yen stood in front of the crowd and watched as Lu Qin walked over. Then he strode forward, stretched out his hands and grasped Lu Qin's arm. Then he nodded heavily. "We won," he said. "We won this battle." Lu Qin raised his head slightly and smiled in the shadow of the black hood. Then he said in a low voice, "Didn't I tell you before? We will win. Let's begin." The black-robed Lu Qin said to Hou Yen. The people standing closest to Hou Yen were his two most trusted warriors. One was Iron Bear and the other was Black Bull. At this moment they turned to look at Hou Yen. They did not seem to understand what Lu Qin meant. But after this battle, even such powerful warriors like them were filled with reverence for Lu Qin. Hou Yen hesitated for a moment and said in a low voice, "I still think it's very difficult. We barbarians would rather die than betray our ancestors." Beside him, Iron Bear and Black Yak were immediately moved. They wore astonished expressions. Lu Qin's had moved slightly, but he didn't seem to mind. He only said casually, "Let's try." "All right." Hou Yen seemed to have finally made up his mind. He turned and walked towards the captives of the Divine Wood tribe. On the other hand, Lu Qin turned around as if he wasn't interested in what was going to happen next. Instead, after his gaze swept across the bloody and messy battlefield, he suddenly exclaimed in surprise, as if he had discovered something. Then he walked towards the center of the tribe's camp not far away. There was a stone altar that looked like it was used to worship the tribe's ancestors. At this moment, most of it had been destroyed. But in the pile of rubble, where fresh blood had been splattered, Lu Qin's gaze fell on something. It was a white bone mask that looked broken and ancient. At the same time, Hou Yen's voice came from behind him. It was steady and loud, echoing in the sky above the tribe. "Now you have two choices. Chapter 317. The white bone mask in Lu Chen's hand wasn't the skull of a human. Although the barbarians worshipped their ancestors, it was common for them to preserve the remains of their ancestors and worship them. However, the thing in Lu Chen's hand had 2 horns, and the shape of its face was completely different from that of a barbarian. It seemed more like an unknown demon beast. Something that could be enshrined on the altar in the middle of a tribe's camp could be considered rather important to a barbarian tribe. However, Lu Chen couldn't tell the origin of this white bone mask. When he held it in his hand, it didn't feel rough at all. Instead, he felt a warm radiance from the tip of his finger. It seemed that after a long period of time, the material of the white bone mask had quietly changed. It was now almost like jade. Even though the shape of the mask was still a little scary, Lu Chen could no longer feel the dense aura of death from it. He played with the white bone mask for a while, then held it in his hand and walked back. At the same time, Huoyan's voice was still echoing, and it quickly caused an uproar among the captives of the Divine Wood tribe. Huoyan explained his intentions very simply to everyone. He gave them 2 choices. 1. Give up your original worship, throw away everything and join the Black Fire tribe, becoming a part of the Black Fire tribe. The second choice was death. Of course, this was the idea that Lu Chen had proposed to Huoyan, and he had tried his best to convince him to carry it out. However, even though Huoyan trusted Lu Chen, he was still very skeptical of this idea. And it wasn't just Huoyan. Even the barbarian warriors like Iron Bear and Black Bull all shook their heads when they heard of this idea. To a barbarian tribe, there was nothing more important than the gods and ancestors they worshipped. To overthrow all of this and make them submit to a tribe might be even more difficult than killing them. Huoyan and the others did not believe that this method would succeed, but Lu Chen insisted on trying. As for the reason, the others did not know, and probably only Huoyan knew. What Lu Chen wanted was to use the fastest, fiercest, and most direct method to increase the strength of the Black Fire tribe. The biggest problem in front of them was that the population of the Black Fire tribe was too small. If they wanted to return to the peak of their power, they would need to increase their population by at least 10 times. Lu Chen did not have the patience to wait, and Huoyan did not want to wait any longer. However, the reality was the reality. When Huoyan told all the barbarians of the Divine Wood tribe about this, there was a moment of astonishment and silence. Then a loud clamor broke out. It was unknown how many barbarians were cursing and swearing. Their expressions were agitated as if they wanted to rush over and tear this enemy who had slandered their ancestors into pieces. And in front of the crowd, the chief of the Divine Wood tribe roared angrily. With unknown strength, he actually jumped up from the ground as if he wanted to rush over and die with Huoyan. But before he could get close, he was kicked away by the tall and burly Tai Xiong, who was standing next to Huoyan with a sneer. Bang! The chief of the Divine Wood tribe rolled a few times on the ground like a gourd, his face covered in dirt for a moment. Many Divine Wood barbarians in the crowd looked agitated, and jumped up one after another, wanting to fight with their lives on the line. But the warriors of the Black Fire tribe standing at the side immediately suppressed them. Shouts, curses, and sounds of suppression filled the air. In the middle of the crowd, there were people who pulled out their swords and slashed a few times, causing blood to appear. After a while, the group of restless barbarians were finally suppressed. Although Huoyan had already expected this situation, he still felt somewhat embarrassed. The veins on his forehead were throbbing, and he wished he could directly raise his sword and hack a few of them to death. But at this moment, a hand suddenly stretched out from the side and pulled him back. Huoyan turned around and saw the black-robed Lu Chen walking to his side. Don't worry. Lu Chen's voice sounded very calm. Huoyan snorted and said, You have also seen the situation, what should we do now? Lu Chen lightly said, Let me do it. He took a step forward, his eyes sweeping across the crowd in front of him. For a moment, almost everyone's eyes fell on him. Many of the Divine Wood tribe's captives looked at the black-robed priest with eyes full of hatred and fear. After a moment, Lu Chen opened his mouth and said, Drag out all the children and women under the age of 8. As soon as these words came out, there was a sudden silence. After a moment, the Divine Wood tribe was filled with curses, while the warriors of the Black Fire tribe looked at each other in dismay. Many people's eyes uniformly looked at Huoyan, who was standing beside Lu Chen. Lu Chen slightly turned around, also looking at Huoyan. Huoyan hesitated for a moment, then suddenly clenched his teeth and said in a deep voice, Listen to the priest. As soon as he gave the order, dozens of warriors of the Black Fire tribe rushed into the crowd like wolves and tigers, grabbing, pulling, dragging, and pulling. The Divine Wood tribe's crowd was immediately filled with cries and screams. There was no lack of people who fought with their lives on the line, but under the powerful strength of the Black Fire tribe, the result of this resistance was just a few more corpses on the ground. Then Lu Chen's order was completely carried out. About half of the women and children in the crowd were captured and alone on the other side of the field. These people with the weakest battle strength looked to be shivering with fear on their faces. No one knew what the terrifying black-robed demon was going to do next. But Lu Chen did not let them wait for too long. He quickly made everyone understand his thoughts. These women and children, whether you like it or not, will become a part of the Black Fire tribe. Lu Chen's cold and calm voice reverberated in the camp. Apart from that, there was no other sound. At this moment, even the air seemed to be filled with a sense of coldness and killing intent. If there are men in the family, let them come and claim them. If no one wants to claim them, then directly distribute them to the Black Fire warriors today. Let them go back and serve the Black Fire warriors and give birth to their children. As soon as these words came out, the faces of the Divine Wood tribe on both sides changed, while the warriors of the Black Fire tribe were overjoyed. Many of them laughed out loud. In the southern wilderness, due to the harsh living conditions, murder and looting were not uncommon. Women and children who had lost their protection were indeed often robbed. But it could be said that it was the first time in many years that Lu Chen planned to directly divide up such a large group of women after the war. While the Black Fire tribe warriors were excited, the Divine Wood tribe naturally looked as if they had lost their parents. Many women and children cried out. However, Lu Chen did not care about this. It seemed that his heart was much colder and harder than these barbaric barbarians. Then Lu Chen directly pointed to the Divine Wood tribe's patriarch who was lying on the ground. His face was covered in blood. He said, "You are the patriarch. Come and identify them first." The Divine Wood patriarch's body swayed, and he looked like he was about to start cursing again. Lu Chen said coldly, "If you don't come over to claim them, you'll be given to my warriors as slaves." The Divine Wood tribe's patriarch gnashed his teeth, but in the end he had no choice but to climb up. Then, under the sorrowful and indignant gazes of everyone, he staggered to the front of the group of women and children and began to claim his own women and children. In this wasteland, the primitive barbarians respected strength, and it was extremely common for men to be superior to women. As the patriarch of the tribe, the Divine Wood tribe's patriarch had actually pointed out 7 women and 2 children. Clearly, he had lived a very comfortable life in the past. The Black Fire tribe's barbarian warriors who were watching with great interest seemed to be filled with jealousy and hatred. A few of them even began to curse, clearly feeling very unbalanced. The Divine Wood tribe's patriarch knew that the situation was not in his favor, so he did not care. He lowered his head and planned to lead his people back. But at this moment, suddenly, a black figure blocked in front of him. It was that mysterious, terrifying, cold and ruthless black-robed priest. "Wait a moment," Lu Chen said calmly. The Divine Wood tribe's camp was instantly silent. Everyone looked over at Lu Chen. The original Vulcan staff had already disappeared. At this moment, the only thing in his hand was the white bone mask that he had casually grabbed. His entire body was hidden in the seemingly ancient black robe, which made him look even colder. After a moment, the Divine Wood tribe's patriarch seemed to have plucked up his courage and asked, "What do you want?" "Our warrior leader has spoken just now," said Yi Zichen. Lu Chen's hood moved slightly, then he looked up at the barbarian in front of him and said, "Join the Black Fire or die. Choose one." The Divine Wood tribe's patriarch's face twisted, but even if he did not turn his head to look, he knew that all his tribesmen were looking at him. He clenched his teeth and suddenly roared, "Impossible, you must be dreaming." Lu Chen looked at him coldly, his fingers moving slightly, and the white bone mask flipped in his palm, emitting a strange white light. After a moment, Lu Chen suddenly picked up the mask and silently and slowly placed it on his face. At the same time he said lightly, "Okay." The white bone mask slowly descended on the human man's face. Strangely, the mask instantly and firmly attached to his face, without any signs of slipping off. All the clansmen of the Divine Wood tribe were in an uproar. But very quickly they saw a pair of dark eyes appear behind the terrifying bone mask. 2 black flames burned behind the terrifying eye sockets, like the eyes of a demon, and fell on the Divine Wood tribe's patriarch. "In that case you can die." The Divine Wood tribe's patriarch was first shocked, then angry. Just as he was about to resist, his expression suddenly changed. He grabbed his throat with both hands and shouted hoarsely. A ball of black flames suddenly spewed out from his mouth. Then it grew 10 times larger as it faced the wind and directly engulfed his entire body. In an instant, A shrill and miserable howl resounded through the entire camp. Chapter 318. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, the black flames engulfed the chief of the Divine Wood tribe. But just like what the black flames had shown in the past, it did not harm the flesh and blood of the human body. Everyone could also see that the chief's body did not suffer any obvious injuries. His flesh and skin were almost completely unharmed in the black flames, as if nothing had happened. However, even though the patriarch of the Divine Wood tribe was unscathed in the black flames, he seemed to have suffered the most terrifying pain in the world. He howled, roared, and cried, throwing the toughness of blood that all barbarians valued the most to the back of his mind. It was as if the pain he was suffering had completely destroyed his will. In the end, he could not even stand. He fell to the ground, rolling and struggling in pain. In his despair, he even began to beg the terrifying black-robed priest for mercy. However, Lucian just stood there, silent and motionless. The black robe covered his figure and the bone mask covered his face. Everyone could only see his deep, dark eyes and the burning black flames. Just like that, under everyone's shocked and incredulous gazes, the Divine Wood Patriarch slowly died under the condition that his flesh, skin and clothes weren't burned. His body was extremely twisted and there were many wounds on his body. But everyone could clearly see that those wounds had been caused by the chief's own clawing. Just what kind of terrifying pain could make a barbarian fall into such a state of despair? When the final howls gradually faded, the air was filled with a frozen coldness. Almost everyone's eyes were filled with fear, including the warriors of the Black Fire tribe standing at the side. No one would question the identity of the black-robed priest anymore. This terrifying, cruel, vicious, suffocating, and mysterious method was the most revered witchcraft in the southern wilderness for thousands of years. When the black flames dissipated, Lu Chen's eyes behind the bone mask once again looked at the twisted corpse on the ground. His pupils seemed to contract slightly, as if he had recalled the painful memories that had haunted him for many years. Next, a cold and calm voice came from behind the bone mask, echoing in the camp. Two warriors of the Black Fire tribe rushed forward and dragged out a barbarian man from the Divine Wood tribe, throwing him in front of Lu Chen. When the barbarian raised his head, he felt a shadow looming over him. The black-robed priest appeared not too far away from him. It was as if the priest had blocked all the light, making the barbarian feel as if the entire world was dark. A hoarse voice came out of the barbarian's mouth. No one could understand what he was saying, or perhaps he didn't say anything at all. However, before he could take another step forward, Lu Chen suddenly said, "Wait." Then he turned around and looked at the corpse. He pointed at the woman and child that had been claimed by the dead chief of the Divine Wood tribe and said coldly, "Take these people to the side and distribute them to the warriors of the tribe when we get back." The barbarian warriors of the Black Fire tribe immediately burst into laughter, while the people of the Divine Wood tribe were filled with grief and despair. But this did not change anything. Amidst the cries of the women, they were brought to the other side. Then Lu Chen turned around and looked at the barbarian and said, "It's your turn. Go and identify them." The barbarian's body trembled as if he could no longer move. Lu Chen said indifferently, "If you recognize them, there's still hope to save them. If you don't, they will definitely be taken away." The barbarian's face was ashen as if he had lost all his life. But in the end, he still went to the group of women and claimed a woman and a child that was still in swaddling clothes. The child seemed to have been born not long ago. It was a small ball wrapped in a piece of animal skin. It was held in the arms of the woman who was also trembling and crying. For some reason, when Lu Chen saw the crying tears of the barbarian woman and the child, his heart suddenly palpitated. For a moment he could clearly feel that somewhere in the depths of his heart seemed to soften. After a moment he turned around and looked at the barbarian man. "It's your turn to choose. There are two paths, which one will you choose?" The man's gaze stayed on his wife and child. His face was full of pain and struggle. Anyone could see the hesitation on his face, but he did not really give up. Instead, a trace of determination gradually appeared on his face, as if he was about to make a decision. But at this time Lu Chen suddenly said, "You should know that no matter what after today, there will no longer be a Divine Wood tribe in this world." The barbarian man's body trembled, and the other Divine Wood tribe members in the distance were also in an uproar. Lu Chen did not care about this at all. He just said indifferently, "Those who are willing to surrender, swear to join the Black Fire tribe and protect your family and children. Those who are not willing to surrender, I will kill them. Without the Divine Wood tribe, why do you still worship the gods and ancestors?" Or are you willing to watch your wife give birth to someone else's child and become a slave for your own child? As he said this, he pointed at the relatives and children of the Divine Wood tribe's chief. The barbarian man's expression was extremely ugly. The determination on his face disappeared, and his expression changed rapidly. He looked as if he was about to collapse. Suddenly, as if in despair, he roared and shouted at Lu Qin, "Even if I surrender, how can you guarantee that the people of the Black Fire tribe won't come to steal my women?" Lu Qin took a step forward and pointed to the sky without hesitation. He said in a clear voice, "I swear to the fire god worshipped by the Black Fire tribe and to the ancestors that as long as you swear to be loyal to me and join the Black Fire tribe, I will treat you equally. If there is any conflict, I will deal with it fairly. If not, let the heavens send down divine punishment and destroy the Black Fire tribe." This oath was said resolutely and without hesitation. The content of this oath was the most important among the barbarian tribes of the wilderness. It could be said to be impeccable. With Lu Chen's words, the expressions of many people of the Divine Wood tribe changed subtly. But on the other side, on the side of the warriors of the Black Fire tribe, Hoi Yan's facial muscles twitched slightly. He stared at the black-robed priest and seemed to grit his teeth. Struggle and hesitation were rare emotions for a barbarian, especially when it involved such a major matter that could overturn the previous half of their lives. Most people would be at a loss. But on this day, when the barbarian man was the first to cry and say that he was willing to surrender to his wife and children, full of shame and despair, the whole camp of the Divine Wood tribe was filled with a cold and dead atmosphere. Even the warriors of the Black Fire tribe had a very ugly expression on their faces. In this wasteland, no one had ever heard of anyone forcing a barbarian to betray his ancestors and beliefs. That kind of pain and despair could be felt by every barbarian, whether it was the barbarians from the Divine Wood tribe or the barbarians from the Black Fire tribe. Their gazes were either filled with hatred, fear, or reverence as they stared at the black-robed priest. The white bone mask made the man look so terrifying and strange. What happened next became numb and cruel. They had to choose between two paths. There was no other possibility, and the price was the barbarians' lives and the fate of their families. The southern wilderness had been a harsh place for survival for a long time. But on this day the barbarians in the camp, whether they were from the Divine Wood tribe or the Black Fire tribe, seemed to have come to a new understanding of this fact. Some people surrendered in despair for their own lives and the fate of their families. They abandoned their ancestors, turned their backs on their gods, and swore an oath to join the Black Fire tribe. There were also some Divine Wood barbarians who were unyielding and would rather die than surrender. What awaited them was the purgatory of the Black Fire tribe, and the scene of their women and children being carved up as slaves in front of everyone. Scene after scene, cold, cruel, and suffocating, played out until the end. In the evening of that day, the warriors of the Black Fire tribe left with a large group of people and set foot on the road back to the city. Many people in the crowd carried big and small bags on their backs, their faces filled with sorrow and pain. Behind them, a fire slowly rose to the sky. The once prosperous Divine Wood tribe camp was engulfed in flames, and the name of the Divine Wood tribe after this night forever disappeared in the night of the southern wilderness. In front of the night, there were stars, dark clouds, and even more deep and boundless darkness, shrouding the vast land of the wilderness. Chapter 319. Thousands of years had passed in the southern wilderness. Countless tribes rose and fell and countless people lived and died. The only thing that never changed was the desolate land and the endless wind and sand. Too much time had passed and one's vision was too far away. It would make people numb. The tribes that had perished and the people that had died would no longer have the power to move people. They would be submerged in the long river of time, buried in the dust of history and easily forgotten by most people. Even if some people remembered them or saw bits and pieces of them from some ancient books, they would just turn the page with an indifferent face. Hoi Yan was the most outstanding barbarian in the Black Fire tribe for many years. Not only did he have a strong body and fierce fighting power, but he also had vision and decisiveness that almost no one else in the tribe had. Perhaps it was because of this that he had never been willing to be ordinary. He did not want to be suppressed in the harsh and barren north of the wilderness, and spent his life fighting with the other four tribes. He knew and remembered the glory of the ancient ancestors of the Black Fire tribe. Ever since he was a child, his biggest dream was to restore his tribe to its former glory. At the same time, he would engrave his name in the history of the tribe as the hero of the revival of the tribe. he would be remembered, praised, and spread by thousands of generations of descendants. It was also for the same reason that he had never thought that he would become a stepping stone, that he would silently dedicate his life to benefit his descendants, and that he would accumulate his strength. The success he wanted was right now, right in this life. Unfortunately, Huoyan himself did not possess that kind of powerful power. That was the most powerful and supreme power in the southern wilderness, witchcraft. Therefore, when he suddenly saw the black fire on Lu Chen's body that day, this barbarian resolutely and inconceivably made the biggest gamble of his life in that short period of time. He desperately dragged a human man onto the pirate ship of the Black Fire tribe, and then pinned the hope of the tribe's revival on him. For this, he piously prayed to the god of fire. Just like in the past, the god of fire remained silent and did not respond. For thousands of years, the privilege of communicating with the god of fire only belonged to shamans and priests who had the power of witchcraft. Huoyan did not know what the god of fire thought of his decision, but he could see that the Black Fire tribe had destroyed the Divine Wood tribe, which used to be on an equal footing with them, in one night. This was a glorious victory that the Black Fire tribe had never had in hundreds of years. This was an unimaginable eruption of the Black Fire tribe after years of decline. Perhaps this was the sign of the Black Fire tribe's rise again. Unlike the Divine Wood tribesmen who were at a loss about their future and had just experienced the extermination of their tribe, every warrior of the Black Fire tribe was extremely excited. As their leader, Huoyan undoubtedly understood the importance of this battle. He could even imagine how the entire northern region of the wilderness would be shaken when the news that the Divine Wood tribe had been annihilated by the Black Fire tribe spread within a few days. The impact of this battle was even greater than the battle between the four races and the Mountain Spirit clan. In the darkness of the night, under the illumination of the torches, the troop moved forward. Except for Huoyan and the huge black wolf Atsu, no one dared to approach the black-robed priest, whether it was the captives who had surrendered in fear or the warriors of the Black Fire tribe. "You've done well." Because there was no one around, it was easier for the two to talk. Huoyan lowered his voice and said to Lu Chen. The hood on Lu Chen's head moved, and he turned his head to look at Huoyan. In the light of the fire, his figure seemed like an illusory shadow, and the white bone mask covering his face made him look even more sinister and terrifying. Huoyan frowned and said, "I don't like you wearing this mask. It's not something of our tribe." Lu Chen was silent for a moment, and then reached out to take off the white bone mask. When his human face, which was out of place among the people around him, reappeared in front of Huoyan, for some reason, Huoyan seemed to be relieved. "That's good," he said. "Are you satisfied with the result of this battle?" Lu Chen asked him. Huoyan smiled and nodded, saying, "I can't think of a better result." As he said this, his expression became serious and he looked at the people behind him, saying in a low voice, "It's only these people that I'm still a little worried about." Lu Chen said lightly, "I've already told you the reason why I'm doing this. This is something that can't be helped. Your tribe has been in decline for too long and your strength is too weak. If you want to compete with the large tribes in the south, you can only take an unconventional approach if you want to see results in a short period of time." Huoyan was silent, but there was still a trace of worry on his face. He said, "Are you really confident?" Lu Chen looked at the darkness in front of him and after a while he said, "We'll subdue as many as we can. As for those that we can't subdue or those that refuse to sincerely submit, I'll let you handle them." Huoyan nodded, his face cold and with a trace of murderous intent. He didn't say anything else. As a barbarian and the leader of the tribe, he was used to seeing blood, killing, and death. He naturally wouldn't be soft-hearted. "That's right, how did you summon that shadow demon?" After a while, Huoyan asked Lu Chen again, a trace of surprise and faint excitement on his face. "I've heard of this thing when I was young, it's one of the most powerful monsters." Lu Chen hesitated for a while, then said, "It's the Fire God Staff's credit." "Fire God Staff?" Huoyan didn't understand and asked, "What about the Fire God Staff?" Lu Chen said, "After it returned to its original state in the Fire God altar, you might not have felt it, but I could feel that after the Fire God Staff merged into one, its spiritual power greatly increased, and it also has an unimaginable power. When using the Fire God's witchcraft, it seems to have the effect of amplifying the power by 10 times. What? Even though Huoyan was already used to being surprised these days, at this moment, he still couldn't help but be shocked. Lu Chen seemed to have already expected such a reaction from Huoyan. He smiled bitterly and said, "That's right. You also know that it hasn't been long since I came into contact with the Fire God's inheritance. There are many witchcraft that I can't use, but with the help of the fire god's staff, it's much more convenient. This is also the biggest reason why I dared to boast to you that we can definitely win against the Divine Wood tribe." Hui Yen let out a long breath, nodded and said, "I see." Then he revealed a happy expression and said, "If that's the case, as long as you diligently train, your cultivation will increase, and with this god's staff won't even the shaman?" He didn't dare to continue, but the meaning in his words was very clear. However, Lu Qin shook his head and said, "I feel that this matter isn't as good as you think." Hui Yen was stunned and said, "Why?" Lu Qin said, "I vaguely feel that this kind of powerful effect probably has an upper limit. Once the power of the Black Fire God reaches a certain level, the Fire God staff will no longer have such a powerful help. Otherwise, how many powerful shamans and priests did your Black Fire tribe produce in the past? With just this Fire God staff, you would be able to flatten the southern wilderness and unify all the races in the north." Hui Yen slowly nodded, looking a little disappointed, but he still smiled and said, "You are right. But after so long, there's something I can't figure out." Lu Qin said, "What's wrong?" Lu Qin looked at him and said, "Since the Fire God staff is so powerful, why did the ancestors of your Black Fire tribe split it into two and only brought one half to the north?" He smiled and casually said, "It can't be that the shamans or priests of your Black Fire tribe in that era, when countless barbarian armies attacked the north, secretly decided that they would lose this battle, so they secretly left the Fire God staff behind and left a spark for your Black Fire tribe, right?" Hui Yen was stunned at first, then laughed and said, "How is that possible?" Lu Qin also laughed and said, "That's right, it's impossible. That's why I can't figure it out." Hui Yen shrugged his shoulders and said, "Then don't think about it. Look in front of us. After walking for a while, we should be able to see our tribe's campsite. Father and the rest should be anxiously waiting for us." Lu Qin slightly narrowed his eyes and said, "Let's go back and take a look. I don't know what they will think when they see the Divine Wood tribe people." Hui Yan's face stiffened and he didn't say anything. Chapter 320. When Hui Yen returned to the Black Fire tribe's camp with this unprecedented victory, the anxious tribesmen who had been waiting for a long time immediately cheered. The entire Black Fire tribe seemed to be boiling with excitement. After returning to the camp from the secret cave in the oasis, they were most worried about their loved ones who had left for the war. Even if the barbarians were savage, fierce and wild, they still had kinship and humanity. For example, among the Divine Wood tribe's people who had surrendered, there were many barbarian warriors who would rather die than surrender. However, under the premise of the tribe's destruction, and when Lu Qin coldly threatened them with the fate of their families, they finally surrendered. Of course, it was also possible that some of them already had the desire to live in their hearts, but they had no excuse in front of the gods and ancestors. Lu Qin just happened to present this almost perfect excuse in front of them, allowing them to live with some humiliation but peace of mind. As for the truth of the matter, no one knew what everyone was thinking. Only they themselves would know. The news of the Black Fire tribe's warriors annihilating the Divine Wood tribe in one fell swoop spread throughout the Black Fire tribe's camp. Great joy immediately enveloped the entire tribe. However, when people saw the Divine Wood tribe's captives following behind the Black Fire tribe's warriors, they were all taken aback. When they heard that under the leadership of the black-robed priest, these Divine Wood tribe barbarians were about to become a part of the Black Fire tribe, the entire camp suddenly burst into an uproar. The Divine Wood tribe, which had been exterminated, was naturally uncomfortable with swallowing so many people from other tribes at once. However, for the Black Fire tribe, which was the victor, it was an unprecedented event. For many years, the barbarians of the southern wilderness had already become familiar with and accustomed to the original rules. In their minds, worshipping the gods and revering their ancestors was a matter of course. No one would ever think of betraying these rules and joining another tribe. Of course, those who had such thoughts now seemed to have not encountered the desperate situation that the Divine Wood tribe had encountered. But no matter what, most of the Black Fire tribe's barbarians couldn't accept this. However, no one in the camp dared to rebuke them. The reason was very simple. Apart from the mysterious and terrifying black-robed priest, the leader of this operation was the extremely prestigious warrior chief, Hui Yen. Moreover, many of the Black Fire barbarians quickly discovered that the strongest and most elite warriors who had followed Hui Yen on this expedition, the barbarians who could be said to be the foundation of the Black Fire tribe's military strength, did not seem to have any objections. Not only that, when that strange atmosphere spread, Almost all the Black Fire warriors stood behind Huo Yan and the black-robed priest, intentionally or unintentionally. That's right, apart from Huo Yan there was also the black-robed priest. Every single Black Fire warrior looked at that black figure with awe that they had never felt before. However, rules that had been ingrained in the hearts of the people for thousands of years could not be easily overturned. Ordinary Black Fire tribesmen were intimidated by these powerful people, but in the Black Fire tribe, there were people of higher status who were not afraid of them. That person quickly walked out and stood in front of all the Black Fire tribesmen. The wrinkles brought by Nian Hua's old age were engraved on Huohu's face. His back was hunched and he was gasping for breath. Even his steps were slow. Perhaps only his eyes still maintained the firm belief of a barbarian tribe leader. His grandson Huohu supported him by his side. Then he looked at the captives who had been brought to his tribe's camp with a complicated and slightly angry expression. In the end, he turned all his disgust into hatred and glared at the person standing beside his father. Lu Qin of course noticed the gaze of the barbarian youth Huohu. Lu Qin only felt that it was a little funny to see that strange but hateful gaze. He could more or less understand the feelings of this barbarian youth called Huohu, but he was not apologetic at all. A long time ago when he was just a youth about the same age as Huohu, under the tutelage of that bald and burly deity stage cultivator, he had already cast aside his weak and compassionate heart. Perhaps after many years his experience had enriched, and his temperament had also changed, but that was only for friends he had met by chance in the human race. As for the southern wilderness, he still did not have the slightest bit of soft-heartedness. Therefore he turned a blind eye to Huohu's angry gaze, and even took out the white bone mask from his bosom in a slightly provocative manner, and slowly put it on his face. After entering the Black Fire tribe's camp, the former Divine Wood tribesmen who had betrayed their ancestors and were forced to join the enemy tribe, seemed very frightened. Looking at the strange and hostile gazes around them, the panic and bewilderment that had been suppressed in their hearts seemed to be on the verge of exploding. Who would believe the barbarians who had betrayed the beliefs of their ancestors? If it were him he would not believe it either. So what would be waiting for him? The unpredictability and fear of death could drive a person insane. Therefore the women tightly hugged their crying children with tears in their eyes, while the men clenched their fists and gritted their teeth. The clamorous noise drifted out from the crowd, increasing the vigilance and hostility of the surrounding Black Fire tribe clansmen. The atmosphere in the camp gradually became tense. It was also at this time that Lu Qin put on the white bone mask. Under the sunlight, Lu Qin looked like the shadow of a demon at this moment, contrasting with the gloomy white bone mask, making him look even more terrifying. But for some reason when the white bone mask appeared on his face, perhaps because they suddenly saw a token passed down by their ancient ancestors, or perhaps because they remembered the promise made by the black-robed priest, the restless Divine Wood tribesmen slowly calmed down. So in the end, everyone's eyes once again fell on the center of the camp. There Huoying supported his grandfather Huohu, and opposite them stood Huo Yan and Lu Qin side by side. The three generations of the Black Fire tribe were the symbols and leaders of the Black Fire tribe. With the addition of a black shadow beside them at this moment, there seemed to be a faint confrontation. The barbarians of the Black Fire tribe looked at this scene with complicated expressions, and Huo Yan's expression did not look good either. After a moment, he stepped forward and bowed to his father, saying, "Father, I've returned." Huohu nodded his head and looked at him with a complicated expression, then swept his gaze over Lu Qin who was standing beside him. After a moment of silence he asked, "What's going on?" Huo Yan had no intention of hiding anything. He raised his head and in front of everyone he clearly explained the ins and outs of the matter. Finally, he looked at Huohu with bright eyes and said, "Father, from today onwards, these people are the people of our Black Fire tribe." The surrounding Black Fire tribe members were deathly silent. No one spoke and no one even dared to breathe loudly. Even Huoying, who was standing beside Huohu, had a change in expression. He looked at his father, who was once the most imposing and upright person in his heart, with his mouth half open as if he did not know what to say. After a while, Huohu suddenly sneered and said, "Nonsense." After these two words were said, it immediately caused a commotion in the surrounding crowd. This was the judgment of the current chief of the Black Fire tribe, and he directly denied what Huo Yan had just said. His attitude and expression were exceptionally clear, leaving no room for refutation. "This is nonsense, this is nonsense." Huohu raised his voice and shouted, "If you are not a descendant of our Black Fire tribe, then you have no right to become a barbarian of the Black Fire tribe." What right do you have to act so recklessly and take in so many people of different races at once? Are you not afraid of the wrath of the fire god and the punishment of the ancestors? Following his harsh words, the other people of the Black Fire tribe seemed to be wavering, and their expressions became somewhat hesitant. The Divine Wood tribe members were once again frightened and panicked, and the scene immediately became somewhat chaotic. Whispers could be heard as if something was about to happen. But at this moment, a voice suddenly came from the side, suppressing all the noise. Right? Who has the right to judge whether the fire god is angry or not, and who has the right to listen to the thoughts of the Black Fire tribe's ancestors? Is it you? In an instant, all the voices in the Black Fire tribe disappeared, and countless gazes fell on the source of the voice. They saw the black-robed priest wearing a white bone mask take a step forward, staring at the old chief and lightly say, "If I remember correctly, the only ones who have the right to judge these matters should be the chief priests of our tribe." Chapter 321. It was so quiet in the Black Fire tribe's camp that one could hear a pin drop. Everyone's faces were cold and stunned. The only difference was that most of the Black Fire clan members were shocked and worried, while many of the Divine Wood clan members who had been exterminated and captured had expressions of joy on their faces. Even though the terrifying black-robed priest was the biggest culprit behind the destruction of the Divine Wood tribe, and even though they still hated this black-robed man not long ago, in this sudden internal strife of the Black Fire tribe, many of these captives who were in an awkward situation and could not even control their own lives secretly sided with Lu Qin. Humans were complicated and strange. Perhaps it was because Lu Qin was the only person in this hateful Black Fire tribe who had promised to let them live, or perhaps it was simply because Lu Qin once wore the white bone mask passed down by the Divine Wood tribe's ancestors that they subconsciously felt a sense of familiarity with him. But no matter what, no one here cared about the thoughts of these captives at this moment. After Lu Qin bluntly said such straightforward words that almost hit the nail on the head, the atmosphere instantly became so cold that it was almost on the verge of exploding. The old chief of the Black Fire tribe looked as if his entire face was twisted. Perhaps for many years, no one had dared to speak to him like this, and no one had dared to challenge his authority in such a straightforward manner. Even Huoyin, who was the successor of the next generation that he had groomed, had always treated him with great respect even when he had some disagreements with him. He had never been so bold before. However, all of this wasn't important at all. Even though these so-called offenses, anger, and so on made the aged fire tiger furious, under his twisted and furious expression, his heart was slowly turning cold and sinking. Because what the human male, the black-robed priest, had said was correct. As the chief of the tribe, Fire Tiger could not be more clear about the correctness of Lu Qin's words. Yes, every word he said was correct. Those were the rules of the Black Fire tribe that had been passed down from ancient times to the present, from countless generations of their ancestors. The priest was the soul of the Black Fire tribe. Not the patriarch. Even though the Black Fire tribe had been declining for many years and had not had a priest for at least hundreds of years, rules were rules. The rules left by the gods and ancestors had never been changed. How dare you speak to me like that? After a long while, Fire Tiger seemed to have awoken from his huge shock. His face was filled with anger as he looked at Lu Qin and roared. Lu Qin continued to stare at the elderly clan leader. He saw the changes in his expression and the flicker in his eyes. At this moment he laughed coldly in his heart. Just as he was about to speak again, a tall figure suddenly blocked his way. That was Fire Rock. As expected, in the end were these two still father and son? Lu Qin narrowed his eyes and stared at Huoyan's back. Huoyan stood motionless, but for some reason his back seemed to tremble slightly. Perhaps it was because he felt a little cold. However, his face was still looking forward, looking at his father and son who were in a state of rage. Perhaps Fire Tiger could still barely control his emotions, but it seemed as if the young Fire Hawk could no longer endure it. His eyes had already turned red, and a beast-like roar came from his throat. It seemed as if Lu Qin's provocation towards Fire Tiger had completely infuriated him. Thus, even with Huoyan standing between them, Fire Hawk was still unable to endure it. Huoyan noticed Fire Hawk's appearance and frowned. Just as he was about to stop him, Fire Hawk suddenly roared and pulled out a blade from his waist. Then, like all the warriors of the Black Fire tribe, he roared and rushed forward, swinging his blade at Lu Qin. At the same time he shouted, "Bold bastard, how dare you speak to your grandfather like that? I'll cut you to death." The blade cut through the sky, bringing with it a trace of coldness. The entire situation seemed to be about to escalate at this moment. Lu Qin sneered, the Black Fire tribesmen were shocked, and Fire Tiger reached out to pull him back but was unable to. All the warriors of the Black Fire tribe, without exception, stood in place without moving. No one stopped Fire Hawk, but no one rushed out to help him either. For a moment, Fire Tiger seemed to have sensed something. His gaze swept across the surroundings, and his expression became more and more unsightly. Huoyan snorted coldly and frowned. His body moved slightly, looking like he wanted to go forward and stop his son. However, at this moment, everyone in the camp suddenly heard the shrill howl of a wolf. A black shadow suddenly scuttled out from Lu Chen's side like a bolt of lightning, instantly pouncing on the Fire Hawk who had just drawn his blade and charged over with lightning speed, instantly pinning him to the ground. That was Black Wolf Atsu. The huge wolf body seemed to directly crush the youth's resistance, and Atsu easily pushed him to the ground. Then, with a roar, it opened its bloody mouth with sharp fangs and directly bit down on Fire Hawk's throat. Everyone's expression changed. No matter what, Fire Hawk was still the grandson of Chief Hua Hu and the only son of the next chief, Huoyan. For a moment, only a series of whooshing sounds could be heard. Finally, 7 or 8 figures rushed out and pounced on Atsu. But it looked like it was too late. In the blink of an eye, those huge fangs had already bitten Fire Hawk's neck. At this moment, Huoyan suddenly turned around and shouted at Lu Qin, "Stop! Stop!" Almost at the same time, Lu Qin also shouted to stop Atsu. Atsu's movement stopped at this critical moment, but its sharp fangs did not leave Fire Hawk, whose face had already turned as pale as paper. It pounced on Fire Hawk's body, and then glanced at Lu Qin from the corner of its eye. Lu Qin ignored it. He did not speak, nor did he make any movements. He only looked indifferently at the burly barbarian in front of him. After a moment he said, "What do you want to do?" Huoyan gritted his teeth. After a moment he said in a low voice, word by word, "He is my son." Lu Qin did not speak and only quietly looked at him. Huoyan's gaze also met his without flinching. Just like this, after an unknown amount of time, Lu Qin slowly nodded, then took a step forward and walked past Huoyan. When he reached Huoyan's side, he waved his hand. Atsu growled and finally let go of the barbarian youth. It trotted all the way back to Huoyan's side. At the same time, Lu Qin used a voice that only Huoyan could hear and said, "He is your son, but he just attacked a tribal priest. Do you still remember the consequences of this kind of reckless behavior a few hundred years ago?" Huoyan silently stood where he was. His expression was abnormally ugly, but he did not say anything. He only watched as Lu Qin walked away. The conflict within the Black Fire tribe suddenly stopped, and then the entire tribe camp seemed to have regained its peaceful and joyful atmosphere. However, whether it was the Black Fire tribe members or the large number of Divine Wood captives, they could all feel the faint undercurrent under the calm surface. Everyone dispersed, and then there were people who came forward to settle down the Divine Wood captives. Although someone had previously promised to let them join the Black Fire tribe, it was obviously not a good time to bring this up. After the sky turned dark in the northeast corner of the camp, in a stone house that had been specially cleared out, Atu the Black Wolf laid at the door, while Lu Qin leaned against the window, looking at the moon that had just risen in the night sky. Apart from the two of them, there was another person in the house. It was Huoyan. He was sitting not far from Lu Qin, looking somewhat silent. Lu Qin retracted his gaze from the slowly rising moon and looked at Huoyan, saying, "What are you thinking about?" Huoyan was silent for a moment, then said, "Why did you deliberately do that in front of the entire tribe?" Lu Qin lightly said, "According to the rules of your tribe, I am now a priest. What do you think a tribal priest would have done in that kind of situation?" Huoyan did not speak. Lu Qin sneered, saying, "If it was any other priest or shaman in the history of the Black Fire tribe, if they met someone who dared to offend them like today, then your son would already be a dead man." He waved his hand, saying calmly, "You know, I was lenient because of you." Huoyan said with some difficulty, "You have to give them a little more time so that they can accept these things now." "What you and I lack the most is time," Lu Qin said bluntly. "I did what I did because I had no other choice." Huoyan said, "But if you continue to be so strong with such powerful witchcraft, sooner or later, your prestige in the tribe will even surpass mine." Lu Qin stared at him and after a moment said, "You are starting to worry about me?" Huoyan was silent for a long time, then slowly nodded, saying, "Yes. I never thought that in the cultivation of the Black Fire spiritual power, you would advance so much in such a short time." He looked up at Lu Qin, saying, with your intelligence and the Black Fire witchcraft, I think it won't be long before the Black Fire tribe is completely under your control. Am I right? He looked at Lu Qin, saying word by word. Chapter 322. The room was very quiet. Neither Lu Qin nor Hui Yen spoke for a long time. Atsu's huge body completely blocked the door. It didn't look like a monster but more like an overfed dog. It glanced at the people in the room tiredly and yawned. It seemed to be bored and slowly narrowed its eyes. Do you know what you're saying? Lu Qin looked at Hui Yen and said calmly, You're actually worried that a human will steal the entire Black Fire tribe? Hui Yen shook his head and said, You're not a normal human. You're now the messenger of the fire god, the priest of our Black Fire tribe. For thousands of years, we barbarians have long been used to obeying the orders of shamans and priests. As long as you truly gain the respect of the entire tribe, then they will definitely listen to your orders and from then on, obtain supreme power. Then what do I want this power for? Lu Qin suddenly interrupted him and asked Hui Yen. Hui Yen was silent. Lu Qin laughed coldly and said, Don't forget, from beginning to end, it was you who dragged me into this. I have no interest in your barbarian games or things like reviving glory. How about this? If you're really worried, then tell me how to return to the north. I'll immediately leave this place and let your Black Fire tribe sleep peacefully. How about that? Hui Yen thought for a while, then looked very seriously at Lu Qin and said, You can't leave. Lu Qin rolled his eyes and said unhappily, If I didn't know that you're a fanatic believer of the fire god, then no matter how I force you, it'll be useless. Otherwise, I would really want to cast a Black Fire curse on you and let you have a taste of that. Although Hui Yen was brave, he couldn't help but frown when he heard those words. He looked at Lu Qin with a complicated expression and said after a moment of hesitation, Speaking of which, didn't you make a promise to the Divine Wood tribe that you would personally guarantee their fate? Why do you want to leave this place so soon? Have you ever thought that after you leave, won't they all fall into a miserable fate after being abandoned by you? In this way, isn't it breaking your oath? What's there to be afraid of? When I swore that day, I only talked about the Black Fire tribe, not myself, Lu Qin replied calmly. Hui Yen was momentarily speechless. After which, he looked at Lu Qin's expression and bitterly laughed for a moment. However, he shook his head and said, Forget it, let's not talk about this. There's something I need to discuss with you. Lu Qin said, What is it? Speak. Hui Yen said, You are now an official priest of our Black Fire tribe. Please don't say that. Lu Qin waved his hand and said, Your father, the current chief of the Black Fire tribe, hasn't acknowledged me yet. My position isn't stable. Who knows, I might be removed in 2 or 3 days. Hui Yen sighed and said, My father still can't understand our thoughts and methods for now. But don't worry, as long as I'm here, he will always stand on your side. Moreover, I don't believe that you can't see that after the battle at the Divine Wood camp, the strongest and most elite warriors of our tribe have already accepted you. They are especially respectful towards you. Lu Qin laughed and said, That's because they received more women and servants after the battle, right? That's also because your witchcraft is so powerful. We, the barbarians of the southern wilderness, are born to respect the strong. Lu Qin smiled and didn't say anything. Hui Yen continued, As for my father, you don't have to worry about him. I will often go over to discuss these matters with him. No matter what, it is the will of the fire god to cooperate with you. I have no doubt about this. No matter what, I will carry this matter to the end. Lu Qin looked deeply at him. A strange light seemed to flash in the depths of his eyes. Hui Yen paused for a moment, then said to Lu Qin, Let's not talk about these troublesome matters first. But I have discovered that you seem to be missing one person. Lu Qin was startled and said, Missing who? Hui Yen said, Missing someone to serve you. You are now a priest of the tribe. Your identity and status are different from others. You should find someone to help you with the daily chores of cleaning the house and preparing meals. No need, it's too troublesome. Lu Qin immediately shook his head and wanted to decline. But Hui Yan's expression was resolute. He stood up and walked out. At the same time he said, Leave this matter to me. I will help you find a satisfactory and hard-working person. You don't have to worry about this. How could Lu Qin not care? He spent his days alone with the Atsu. He wasn't afraid of any secret matters being leaked. If there was suddenly a barbarian by his side, wouldn't his hands and feet be tied? But Hui Yen seemed to be an impatient person. After saying those words, he strode out of the house. In the blink of an eye, he disappeared. Lu Qin chased to the door. When he looked outside, he could no longer see Huoyan's back. Lu Chen looked up at the sky. After a moment, he spat out a mouthful of impure air. He smiled bitterly and said, "Forget it, let's leave it be." Huoyan fulfilled his promise the next morning. He brought the person he wanted to the door of the stone house that Lu Chen lived in. Last night, the mysterious and terrifying black-robed priest didn't seem to do anything strange. He just sat quietly under the wall of the house. His big black wolf was still loyally lying on the ground in front of the door, watching the people coming and going in the camp. For thousands of years, Lu Chen was the first human to come to the southern wilderness. So Huoyan certainly couldn't find another human to serve him. So, the person that Huoyan brought over this morning was a barbarian. It was a female barbarian. She looked to be about 18 or 19 years old. She was still very young, but her expression seemed to be full of grief. When she looked at Lu Chen, her gaze seemed to be very complicated. It seemed that she was thinking about how to avenge the deaths of her clansmen. How to secretly get rid of this incomparably cruel black-robed priest. Lu Chen stared at the woman for a while. Then he turned around and walked to Huoyan's side. He glared at him and sneered, "Are you afraid that I won't die fast enough?" Huoyan heard this and said, "How could there be such a thing?" Lu Chen pointed at the young body that was kneeling on the ground and sneered, "This woman is clearly a young woman that no one in the Divine Wood tribe has claimed. Why did you send her to me? What do you want? Let her serve you." Huoyan laughed loudly. Then he waved his hand and turned around to leave. Lu Chen was somewhat helpless. He was about to say something when he turned around and looked at the young barbarian. He sighed and asked, "What is your name?" "My name is Yi." Chapter 323. Yezi was a barbarian girl. Because she was young, her skin looked better than most of the barbarians in the wilderness. However, there were still obvious characteristics of the barbarians on her body. For example, there were sharp fangs protruding from the corners of her mouth, tattoos on her body, and she was actually quite tall. When Lu Chen called her up, he found that this barbarian girl was almost as tall as him. In fact, from the aesthetic point of view of the human race, most people would not be able to accept barbarian women. However, it was probably because of her young age. In general, this woman named Yezi seemed to be more pleasing to the eye than the ferocious barbarians outside. Compared to those barbarians who like to have their faces covered with twisted patterns and talisman tattoos, Yezi's exposed skin only had 2 tattoos on her upper left arm and right thigh. This was also the reason why she looked more delicate. However, having been in the Black Fire tribe for so long, Lu Chen roughly knew some of the barbarians' customs. It was not that Yezi did not want to have those colorful tattoos on her face, but because those tattoos on the face often meant boasting, meritorious deeds, achievements, or other qualifications. It was not something that could be casually tattooed on. It was probably because this barbarian girl was too young and not qualified enough. While Lu Chen was sizing up the barbarian girl, Yezi was also secretly looking at him. The women of the tribe were still more gentle than the aggressive male warriors. In her eyes there was a bit of awe and curiosity, but it seemed to be mixed with a bit of resentment. Lu Chen quickly noticed this. He did not have any intention of guessing, but directly asked Yezi about her origin and identity. Yezi lowered her head and said. Just as Lu Chen had guessed, Yezi was a member of the Divine Wood tribe who had surrendered after their tribe was exterminated. Would he let a woman who had a grudge against him, and who might even have relatives who died in the war started by Lu Chen by his side? Huoyan's burly and brave figure flashed in front of Lu Chen's eyes. He thought to himself, what is this guy whose mind is far more detailed and profound than the other barbarians thinking? Did he have some ulterior motive, or was it simply because it was convenient? Currently the atmosphere within the Black Fire tribe was rather delicate. Patriarch Huahu was clearly dissatisfied with Huoyan and Lu Chen's actions. Despite Huahu's advanced age, many of the tribe's warriors stood on the side of Huoyan and Lu Chen. However, he had been the chief of the tribe for many years after all. He was a person of virtue and prestige and no one could ignore him. Not to mention that Huahu was Huoyan's father after all. They were related by blood, so ordinary people could not do anything to him. Even in the barbarian tribes, which were known for their ferocity and savagery, it was not popular for the sons to go against their elders, or for the sons to fall out with their fathers and even fight with them. Under such circumstances, it might not be convenient for Huoyan to directly call for a tribesman from the Black Fire tribe to serve Lu Chen. Instead, he would not need to be courteous with the Divine Tree captives, and would be able to account to the Black Fire tribe. As for what Lu Qin had said before about giving these people equal treatment, let's just wait and see. Probably not many people would take it seriously. Lu Qin pondered in silence while Yi just stood there. She did not dare to move until she received the orders of this mysterious and terrifying priest. Just like that, after an unknown period of time, Lu Qin suddenly withdrew his gaze and looked at her again. "Come here," he said calmly, but his tone seemed to have an unquestionable aura. Yi lowered her head and responded, slowly walking in front of him. Like most of the barbarians, Yi's clothes were mainly animal skins, supplemented by small stones of various shapes and colors, animal teeth and small bones as ornaments. The harsh sandstorm on the wilderness did not seem to have damaged the beauty and youth of this barbarian girl. The exposed skin on her arms and thighs was still fair. But not far in front of her, the man stood in front of her like a mass of darkness. One black and one white, the shadow and the light, juxtaposed in such a somewhat dazzling way in the stone house. But at least at this moment, Yi's whiteness looked particularly small and fragile. In front of the threatening dark aura, or because of the awe she had for the shaman and the priests since she was a child, even if she still held a trace of resentment in her heart, Yi could not help but kneel down. She was just an ordinary barbarian girl. She did not have the powerful force of the barbarian warriors. She was weak and ordinary. Not to mention that even the barbarian warriors, who were known for their ferocity and toughness, were in awe of this shadow-like man. After a moment, Yi suddenly felt a chill on the top of her head. It was a hand that was gently placed on the top of her head. Why was the palm so cold, almost not like the flesh and blood of a human? At that moment Yi even trembled for no reason. She closed her eyes and was very afraid. She even felt that it was not a hand that was pressing on her head, but a piece of gloomy white bone. "Do you hate me in your heart?" That calm, seemingly emotionless voice sounded in Yi's ears. Yi was stunned for a moment, and then immediately shook her head desperately. She was afraid that if she moved a little slower, this terrible and evil priest might make her suffer the most terrible punishment in the legends. Lu Qin looked at the terrified barbarian girl and wanted to say something, but after a moment he secretly sighed in his heart. He thought to himself, what's going on? Didn't he say that he was indifferent to these barbarians and had no interest in them? Why did he suddenly feel that his heart had softened? He withdrew his hand, turned around and walked back to his original place and sat down. After a moment she heard him say, "This time, you probably know the people of the Divine Wood clan who came with you, right?" Yi breathed a sigh of relief after his hand left her head, but after hearing this she became a little nervous. At the same time she had a faint feeling that the fate of her clan was about to be decided. She hesitated for a moment and then said carefully, "I know them all, Lord Priest. What do you want to do?" Lu Qin raised his head slightly and looked at her. Yi was shocked and quickly prostrated on the ground saying, "Lord Priest, don't be angry. I just want to help you. Now I have been sent to serve you. No matter what, you can ask me to do it and I will do my best to do it." Roar. Lu Qin did not make any response, but at this moment, a low roar suddenly came from behind Yi. A huge shadow suddenly appeared and covered her with a strong murderous aura. Leaf screamed and turned her head. What she saw was a bloody mouth and then a huge ferocious wolf head. The sharp fangs were about to pierce her face, and a pair of big eyes like copper bells were staring at her fiercely. It seemed that the next moment, it would pounce on her and swallow her in one bite. Yi's body went limp and she almost fainted. Her body could not help but curl back desperately. After a while she reacted. Wasn't this the huge black wolf that had been following the mysterious priest? Before, it was already very frightening, but now that it was so close to the giant wolf, its ferocious and terrifying aura was even more frightening. He had no doubt that this demon wolf must have killed countless people and eaten countless flesh and blood. Could it be that the purpose of me being placed next to this priest was to become the wolf's food? There was no trace of blood on the barbarian girl's face, and she looked like she was about to be scared to death. At this moment Lu Qin frowned and said, "Enough, Atsu, you're too free, aren't you?" The huge black wolf that was baring its fangs and looking like the most terrifying monster in the world suddenly shrank back. Its original ferocious appearance disappeared in the blink of an eye, and then it returned to its lazy appearance. It grinned and called out, then slowly walked to Lu Chen's side and lay down. It opened its mouth and yawned, but it rested its head on Lu Chen's leg, and then narrowed its eyes again. Yi, who felt that she had escaped from death, slowly recovered after a long while. She gasped and once again knelt on the ground in front of Lu Chen with some difficulty. Lu Chen looked at her helplessly. After a moment of silence he said, "Are you all right?" Yi whispered in a trembling voice. I'm fine." Lu Qin sighed and said, "If you're tired, you can go back and have a rest for a while." Yi shook her head and said, "The leader who led me here just now said that I will be your servant from now on. From today on I will eat, drink and live here. I can't go anywhere." Lu Qin was speechless for a moment. After a moment he said, "Then do as you please." Yi bowed her head and agreed. After a while she looked around again, and then quietly got up and walked to the side to start cleaning up the house. Lu Qin didn't care about her. Anyway, there was nothing important in this house. After waiting for a while, he suddenly seemed to think of something, and then asked Yi casually, "By the way, among your people this time, how many warriors or adult men are there who can fight?" Yi's body trembled and her face suddenly turned pale. Lu Qin waited for a while, but found that he didn't get the answer he wanted. He frowned and looked at her. "What's wrong with you?" He suddenly ran over, knelt in front of Lu Qin and then kowtowed desperately. Her eyes were full of tears and she cried, Your Excellency, I beg you to let my people go. As long as you don't let them die, I'm willing to do whatever you want ye to do." With that, she seemed to have made a difficult decision. She suddenly put her hand on her animal skin clothes, and was about to tear them off. Chapter 324. With a crisp sound, Yezi exerted her strength and directly tore off more than half of her animal skin clothes. Lu Qin only felt a sudden flash of white light in front of his eyes. At that moment even a calm and steady person like him was dumbfounded. He stared at Yezi with her mouth half open. For a moment he was stunned and didn't know what to say or do. He just sat there motionlessly. Atsu, who was originally a little lazy beside Lu Qin, seemed to be shocked. With a quiver he turned over and jumped up. He looked up at Yezi, who had suddenly revealed half of her body. He stared at her with a pair of dog eyes and didn't make a sound for a long time. The atmosphere in the stone house instantly fell into silence. Yezi closed her eyes tightly, her cheeks flushed. Her heart was shy and indignant, and there was also a kind of desperation, as if she was sacrificing herself for justice. However, after waiting for a long time, she suddenly woke up from her inexplicable emotions, but found that it seemed that the expected thing did not happen. Almost all of the barbarian tribes in the wilderness were dominated by men and women. Especially the barbarian women who had been defeated, captured, and turned into female slaves. They had no dignity to speak of. They were often reduced to the playthings of their new masters, or become tools to give birth to future generations. In fact, as long as the barbarian women who fell into such a situation did not want to die, they often hoped to have children. As long as they had offspring, then for the sake of the children, their situation would be improved, or at least they could get a relatively formal identity. In Yezi's original expectation, she was ready to give up her dignity and sacrifice her body. Under normal circumstances, if the opponent was a barbarian, he would most likely have rushed over to push her down and ravage her. But the strange thing was that this situation did not happen now. She stood there, feeling that her surroundings seemed to be empty. No one was approaching and there was no sound. There was only a trace of wind passing over her white skin, bringing a slight chill. Yezi opened her eyes and found that the black-robed priest in front of her had turned around. Instead, his huge black wolf pet was still staring at her. Its pair of fierce eyes were full of surprise and doubt. "Sir." You didn't know what was wrong with this mysterious and terrifying black-robed priest. Why didn't he act like a normal barbarian man? Could it be that he was a great and terrifying priest who possessed the power of the legendary Blackfire witchcraft, so he was different from the other barbarians? But, as a man, his physiological structure should be the same and normal as the barbarians. Ye's imagination began to run wild. At the same time he was a little shocked and afraid. He was worried that if his actions did not tempt the priest and instead angered him, wouldn't it bring a great disaster to his clansmen? Thinking of this, Yi felt her legs turn to jelly. It had to be admitted that Yi was not a very knowledgeable and capable barbarian. In fact, she was just an ordinary barbarian girl in the Divine Wood tribe. At most, her beauty and skin were passable, but she had grown up in the tribe and only knew some basic rules of the barbarian world. Given time, if nothing had changed, she would have found the strongest and bravest warrior in the tribe and married him. Then she would serve him wholeheartedly and bear his children. When her husband went to war, she would worry and pray for him. When he returned safely, she would be filled with joy. She would work hard day and night, living an ordinary life. Until one night this year, when the terrifying shadow of the black-robed priest covered the sky and the sun. When the terrifying shadow demon descended from the sky, the Black Fire tribe was invaded by the witchcraft warriors. Then the Divine Wood tribe, which had lasted for many years, perished. She and many other clansmen became the black-robed priest's captives. She should have hated him. In fact, deep down in her heart, she still loathed and hated this person. However, fear was a stronger emotion in her heart. That night, it overwhelmed everything else. She didn't even dare to have any thoughts of hatred in front of this man. According to the legends, the shamans and priests were omnipotent, and some could even read people's minds. How is he going to deal with me? It's fine if I die, but don't drag others down with me. Just when Yezi's mind was in a mess and all kinds of distracting thoughts came one after another, Luchin coughed softly and said, "You, put on your clothes first." Yezi was stunned for a moment. She was a little embarrassed at first, but then she felt a burst of joy in her heart. From the tone of the priest, it seemed that he wasn't angry. However, it was said that these big shots were temperamental. No one could be sure what they would do in the next moment. Yezi hurriedly agreed, and then hurriedly put on the animal skin clothes that she had just torn off. The only thing that was a little awkward was that the animal skin clothes were originally sewn. Just now, she had the determination to tear it apart regardless of everything. Even if she died here today, it didn't matter at all, so when she tore it, she didn't even think about what to do if she had to wear it again later. She saw that the animal skin clothes had been directly torn in half. No matter how Yezi tried to cover it, it was not secure. Either the front part fell off or the back part was exposed. In the end, Yezi had no choice but to take off the two pieces of animal skin from the front and back with a red face. She directly tied them together with a knot, and then tied them above her chest regardless of the part above her waist. Only then did she barely cover her body, and it was not too ugly. However, in this way her petite figure was even more alluring. Luchin, who turned around and saw this scene, rolled his eyes in his heart. He thought that it was fortunate that this barbarian girl had a barbarian face and two small fangs that were similar to that of a beast. Otherwise the temptation was really not small. But in any case, even if Luchin was not a gentleman for so many years and had done many shady things, he still had no interest in a barbarian woman. So, after glancing at Yezi's exquisite body, he turned his eyes away, frowned and said to Yezi, "I just want to ask, how many warriors are left in your tribe now? Why do you look like the sky is falling down?" Yezi's eyes were red and there were faint tears in them. She knelt on the ground again and said, "I beg you, Your Excellency, please let my people go." Luchin sighed, walked to her and sat down, saying, "What are you thinking in your heart? Tell me clearly." Yezi hesitated for a moment, but still lowered her head and said, "It turned out that in the southern wilderness, because the barbarians were fierce and warlike, there were often tribal wars in the past. Since there was war, there was naturally blood, death, and captives. The barbarians were not polite to the captives. With their fierce nature, one could easily imagine the fate of those captives. The women could be divided up like property. If the men were not tortured to death, they would be forced to do some extremely dangerous work. Or they would be forced to charge at the front lines in the next battle. They would be used as cannon fodder to exhaust the enemy's strength." Yezi naturally knew these things. In fact, she did not have much hope, but on the night of the extinction of the tribe, Luchin gave them hope, saying that they should be treated equally and become a part of the Black Fire tribe. This was naturally very different from the treatment of captives in most barbarians' minds. But it was this little bit of hope, coupled with the oppression of the tragic fate of their families, that led to so many people being forced to surrender. Yezi had just heard Luchin's words, not including women and children, but only the number of adult men. This immediately triggered the most terrifying thought in her heart, and she immediately lost control. After listening to the barbarian girl lying on the ground in front of him, intermittently sobbing from time to time, Luchin did not know whether to laugh or cry. He shook his head and said with a wry smile, "You've misunderstood. I didn't mean that." Yezi's body stiffened, and she immediately raised her head to look at the black-robed priest. Her eyes were filled with surprise, and it seemed that even the hidden hatred seemed to have faded a lot. Luchin waved his hand and said, "I have no intention of going back on what I said to you. As long as I am here, I will naturally do it. You can also say these words to your people when you go back." Yezi nodded repeatedly and said, I will. Thank you, Your Excellency, thank you." Luchin snorted and said, "Now you should be relieved. Now can you tell me how many men there are in your Divine Wood tribe?" Yezi did not answer directly. She looked a little hesitant. Luchin said with some amusement, Do you have a brain or not? I'm just asking you in passing. Do you think I won't know if you don't tell me? Believe it or not, I can go out and find a few leaders of the Blackfire tribe and ask them directly? Yezi thought that it was true and immediately became a little discouraged. She could only say with some embarrassment, about 40 people. Luchin was a little surprised, but then he understood. Of course, not all of them were the warriors of the Divine Wood tribe in the past. There should be a lot of them just to make up the numbers. He pondered for a moment and waved his hand, saying, "Go and call those men over." Yezi was a little worried again, but after seeing Lu Chen's expression, she did not dare to say anything more. She could only agree and go out. And after watching her leave, Lu Chen subconsciously felt a sense of relief. The burst of dazzling white just now was dazzling. It was really rare to see a barbarian woman with such good skin. At this moment, Hei Lang suddenly let out a low growl. Lu Chen glanced at it and said, "What are you doing?" "Behave." Atsu looked at him with a look of contempt. Lu Chen coughed dryly and turned around, saying, "I was stunned just now." "Stunned, do you understand?" "I was stunned, so I didn't mean to stare." Brr. Lu Chen ignored it and walked slowly to the side. Then he muttered in a low voice, "I didn't expect it to be so big." Chapter 325. When Yezi came out of the mysterious black-robed priest's house, she was seen by many people in the Blackfire tribe's camp. Then almost everyone saw her disheveled appearance. It couldn't be helped. When she went in, she was wearing a complete set of clothes from her neck to her waist, but when she came out, she could only barely cover her chest. Even if one were to say that nothing had happened, one would have to believe it. However, perhaps because of Lu Chen's recent reputation, and the fact that the barbarians generally revered the priest, no one really stepped forward or loudly discussed anything. Everyone just watched the barbarian girl walk away with complicated emotions, and then began to whisper to each other. Of course, Yezi could feel the strange gazes of the people around her. She blushed again and felt a little annoyed. But when she looked down at her torn clothes that could only be tied together, she could only walk away silently. These clothes were torn by him. If he had to blame someone, he really didn't know who to blame. Just like that, she walked quickly with her head down, and soon returned to the place where the Blackfire tribe had settled the Divine Wood tribe captives. After being exterminated, they became captives under someone else's roof, and even their survival depended on the mood of others. The Divine Wood tribe members here were naturally very sensitive. The news that Hui Yin had come to pick Yezi and give her to Lu Chen as a maid had already spread throughout the Divine Wood tribe. So when they saw Yezi suddenly return, a large group of people immediately surrounded her. Most of the people walking in front were women, and most of them were slightly older. There were 1 or 2 old men beside them, and it seemed that they had some experience or reputation among the Divine Wood tribe members. These people obviously wanted to ask Yezi if there was any progress outside, and if the black-robed priest intended to keep his promise. But soon, everyone's eyes suddenly fell on Yezi. Looking at the girl who was still fully clothed when she left in the morning, and now revealing her fair waist and smooth and alluring shoulders, while her clothes only covered her chest, many people's gazes immediately changed. After a moment of silence, a group of women rushed forward and squeezed the other old men and men to the back, surrounding Yezi tightly in the middle. In an instant, countless questions rushed into Yezi's ears. "Yezi, what happened to you? Did that priest sleep with you? Poor child, that beast must be very fierce. Look, even his clothes have been torn in half. Does your body hurt? How pitiful. Come over here. Andy will give you a hug." Yezi felt her head buzzing and almost dizzy, but she still heard some of the questions in the noise. She quickly replied, No, I'm fine. I really didn't. Sai, such a good girl, she should have been married to our tribe's warriors and given birth to our children. Who would have thought that she would be defiled by the Blackfire tribe's bastards? Before Yezi could finish her words, she was interrupted by a wave of comforting voices filled with sadness, pity, and heartache. The barbarian aunties around her kept comforting her, pushing her around and holding her in their arms, telling her not to be sad, not to be sad. This was inevitable for a woman in her life, and it didn't matter if she was bitten by a dog when she went out for a walk. Moreover, now that the Sacred Wood tribe had fallen into such a miserable state, they could only depend on the Blackfire tribe. The black-robed priest's position in the Blackfire tribe was not to be underestimated. Having a woman serve him was a good thing for everyone. At first, Yezi wanted to continue to argue, but after being interrupted several times and hearing the words of the people around her, she suddenly lowered her head, and her eyes were a little red. It was still noisy around her. Everyone seemed to be comforting her. Later, a few respectable elderly people squeezed in and solemnly told Yezi that they hoped she would be more open-minded and not be sad. They hoped that she would serve the black-robed priest carefully and endure any grievances. If she was sad, she could come back and tell everyone. Then it would be fine. At least in this way, everyone would be able to live a better life. Later, Yezi cried and shed tears. Surrounded by her clansmen and surrounded by seemingly warm hugs, her tears inexplicably flowed like pearls with a broken string. She couldn't stop even if she wanted to. Yezi went back to change her clothes and then returned to the stone house where Lu Chen was. But at this moment she was accompanied by a group of men from the Sacred Wood tribe. The barbarians of the Black Fire tribe who noticed the commotion here were quickly attracted over. After all, there were suddenly so many foreigners in the tribe's camp. Although the higher-ups had said that they would merge into one after the annexation, it didn't mean that the Black Fire tribe would accept these people of different surnames from the Sacred Wood tribe. Moreover, there didn't seem to be such an example in the southern wilderness since ancient times. Among the crowd of onlookers from the Black Fire tribe, there were many strong adult men. They were the Black Fire barbarian warriors. Although they looked at Lu Chen's stone house with awe, when they looked at the Sacred Wood tribe captives, their gazes were not very friendly. There was even some hostility and vigilance. After all, they had been fighting to the death not long ago. But what happened next was beyond most people's expectations. After Lu Chen walked out of the stone house, he didn't avoid the onlookers and directly looked at the captives. He pointed at them and eliminated about half of the old and weak, leaving about 20 of the strongest men. After that, Lu Chen returned to the stone house with the huge black wolf and Yezi. The people who were eliminated went back first, leaving the remaining 20 people standing outside the house at a loss. After a while, footsteps sounded in the stone house again, but this time it was Yezi who walked out alone. Her expression looked a little complicated, but she was generally calm. Under the gaze of the crowd, she walked towards the 20 people and pointed at one of them, asking him to follow her into the stone house. At this time, not only were the remaining people bewildered, even the onlookers from the Black Fire tribe did not understand what the black-robed priest was going to do. They all whispered to each other. But just as they were whispering to each other, an inexplicable aura suddenly emanated from the dim stone house. Although it was not as exaggerated as the sky changing color, and although there were no abnormalities or obvious changes, everyone seemed to feel their hearts beating violently. Then for a moment the stone house seemed to be completely dark. It was shrouded in incomparably deep darkness, and in the deepest part of the dark shadow, there seemed to be a flame suddenly burning. No one could see the flame. It was just a feeling. Perhaps it was because the flame was black. Everyone quietened down and stared at the dark stone house. After waiting for a while, it seemed like a long time. Finally, the darkness seemed to slowly fade, and after a while, a figure slowly walked out. It was the divine wood warrior who was called in by Yezi. At this moment, the strong barbarian warrior looked a little defeated, and his expression was a little complicated. He looked a little nervous, a little worried, and a little excited. Moreover, he seemed to be relieved. All kinds of strange and contradictory feelings appeared on this barbarian at the same time. No one could figure out what he had experienced just now. And before the surrounding people could gather around to ask, another set of footsteps came from the house. Soon the barbarian girl Yezi walked out again. After looking around expressionlessly, she pointed at another barbarian waiting outside and asked him to follow her in. When Yezi and the somewhat uneasy man entered the stone house again, the surrounding divine wood warriors immediately surrounded the first barbarian warrior and began to ask questions. The surrounding Black Fire tribe people also stretched their necks to get closer to them. They were also very curious. In the crowd, the barbarian warrior with a complicated expression was silent for a moment. Suddenly he stretched out his hand and pulled open the front of his shirt, revealing his strong chest. Immediately the surrounding people's gazes fell on his bulging muscles. Suddenly everyone became silent. Where the crowd's line of sight could reach, there was now a totem symbol that was shaped like a blazing flame on the vital point of his chest. The totem symbol was completely black, deep and murderous, and it looked as if it would really burst into flames at any moment. That was the totem symbol of the Black Fire tribe. With the appearance of this symbol, there was a sudden uproar in the crowd further away. Several people, almost all of them warriors of the Black Fire tribe, cried out in surprise. In the middle of their foreheads, there was also the same rune. It was the same rune that Lu Chen used to cast the Black Fire witchcraft to demonize them. Chapter 326. The appearance of the black fire rune on the Divine Wood tribe warrior caused an even greater uproar and surprise among the black fire tribe compared to the group of captives. Everyone whispered to each other, anger and surprise on their faces. At the same time, a few strong barbarian warriors even turned around and ran into the distance. After a while, a group of people surrounded Hui Yen and walked over with large strides. The group of people in front quickly felt that something was wrong and quickly made way for them, including the group of Divine Wood tribe captives. Although there was still a hint of unwillingness on their faces, there was also a hint of fear on their faces. Most of them lowered their heads and retreated to the side. People who had just been exterminated and captured would never have the courage to resist. Moreover, when this group of aggressive Black Fire tribe warriors walked over, each of them looked like a fiend. At the same time, many people noticed that some of them had blades and axes hanging on their bodies, intentionally or unintentionally. In the world of the barbarians, knives and axes only had one use, and that was to kill. Hui Yen stood in front of this group of warriors with a solemn expression. His face looked a little gloomy, while the other Black Fire tribe warriors all had different expressions. There was reverence, anger, fear, and even a little worry. However, when they felt a dark aura surging out from the stone house, almost everyone stopped in their tracks. That was the power of witchcraft. Every warrior here, especially those who had experienced the battle with the Divine Wood tribe, could clearly feel it. They also understood the danger of this power more than the other tribesmen who did not know the origin of this power. Hui Yan's face was dark as he stood outside the dark door, staring into the depths of the darkness. His expression was indifferent, making it impossible for others to see what he was thinking. However, they could faintly see that the depths of his pupils were slightly contracting. After an unknown amount of time, the powerful dark aura finally faded. After a while, just like before, Yi sent out another man who had been marked with the black fire rune. She was about to point out the next person when a tall and burly figure suddenly appeared in front of her. Hui Yan's hill-like body stood in front of Yi like a giant beast. Yi subconsciously took 2 steps back, a trace of fear flashing across her face. However, Hui Yan did not pay too much attention to this barbarian girl. His gaze never left the dark stone house. At this moment, he only casually said to Yi in a low voice, "Lead the way, I want to see him." When he said this, Hui Yan's expression was not particularly fierce, but there was an inviolable aura in his tone. Yi secretly swallowed her saliva and then agreed in a low voice. She did not dare to call anyone else and just turned around to lead Hui Yan into the stone house. Following behind Hui Yan were Tai Xiong Heinyo, and a group of his trusted warriors. Seeing this, they also wanted to follow, but when Hui Yan was about to reach the doorstep, his body paused for a moment, then he turned around and suddenly ordered, "You guys wait outside." After saying this, he directly walked into the stone house without saying a word. Iron Bear, Black Bull, and the rest of the Black Fire warriors looked at each other. However, after a while they finally spread out in 2s and 3s around the stone house. Then, intentionally or unintentionally, they surrounded the stone house and the 20 Divine Wood warriors outside. The moment he walked into the stone house, Hui Yan suddenly felt a feeling of darkness in front of him. After a while, when his eyes gradually adapted to the darkness, he saw a figure sitting in front of the stone house. At the same time, there was an extremely large figure lying on the ground beside him. A pair of slightly green eyes glanced at him. Needless to say, it was naturally Lu Chen and Atsu. He walked up nervously and hurriedly, kneeling in front of the black-robed priest. When he stammered and wanted to explain something, Lu Chen casually waved his hand and said indifferently, "No need to say anything. This is our tribe's warrior leader. He can come whenever he wants." Hui Yan's expression was grave and stern. He did not reply. Instead, he slowly walked over and stopped a few feet in front of Lu Chen. Hui Yan's sturdiness were extremely outstanding even among the barbarian race's warriors. Originally, his stature was much larger than Lu Chen's. At this moment, Lu Chen was sitting on the ground while he was standing. The difference between the two of them seemed to be even greater. It was as if an angry giant beast was staring at a small beast in front of it. He knelt to the side and looked at this somewhat tense and stiff scene. For some reason, his heart suddenly jumped to his throat. He was so nervous that he did not dare to breathe. However, Lu Chen's expression seemed to be very calm. He only lightly raised his head and looked at Hui Yan. He then pointed at the seat in front of him and said, "Sit." Hui Yan did not comply and sat down. He coldly looked at Lu Chen and said in a low voice, "Why did you do this?" Lu Chen didn't answer him immediately. Instead, he silently sat where he was. After a while, he didn't look at the giant like Huoyin standing not far away from him. Instead, he faintly said, "Ever since you were young, didn't your father, the chief of the tribe, teach you to respect and observe some etiquette towards the tribe's priests?" As he said this, the atmosphere in the dark stone house suddenly became a bit more tense. A chill that seemed to be able to freeze one's bones began to spread in this place. Ye's whole body began to tremble slightly. She subconsciously curled up her body desperately. At the same time, in the depths of her heart, an idea suddenly flashed like a flash of lightning. These two people, the two most powerful people in the Blackfire tribe, seemed to be at odds with each other. "You go out first." Just as Ye's mind was in a state of panic and confusion, a voice suddenly sounded in front of her. It was Huoyin who suddenly said this. His voice was low and calm. When he spoke, he did not even look at Ye's direction. It was obvious that he did not care about this divine wood tribe girl at all. He looked at Lu Chen with trepidation. When she saw him lightly wave his hand, she jumped up as if she had been pardoned and quickly walked out of the stone house. The moment she stepped out of the door, when light shone on her from outside, Yi somehow had the illusion that she had returned to the human world from hell. She let out a long sigh of relief. But very quickly she found that there were many barbarian warriors standing around her. Each of them had a cold expression on their faces as they looked in her direction. On their hands, the sharp edges of the blades and axes were flashing with cold light. Ye's heart that had just warmed up suddenly turned cold again. Then it sank again. In the stone house, when there were no outsiders present, the atmosphere actually began to ease a little. Even the giant wolf Atsu that had been snuggling up to Lu Chen did not show any hostility or vigilance towards Huoyin. Huoyin silently sat down in front of Lu Chen. After which, he raised his head to look at the latter. Very quickly he discovered that Lu Chen was still wearing the white bone mask. His brows involuntarily furrowed as his expression turned a little ugly. "Why are you wearing that again?" Lu Chen took off the white bone mask from his face and placed it at the side. He said, "When I inscribe the black fire runes on the bodies of those divine wood tribe people, I need them to not be too resistant, otherwise it will be very troublesome. I found that wearing this thing was quite useful, probably because this mask was passed down from their ancestors. When they saw me wearing it, they would feel relaxed and they wouldn't be too hostile towards me, which made it easier for them to cast their spells." Huoyin snorted and said, "Why do you want to use this kind of spell on them? You should know that this is a power that belongs to our Black Fire tribe." By the end of his sentence, Huoyin had already raised his voice, showing the anger in his heart. Lu Chen did not look too surprised, nor did he speak up to defend himself. He only looked at him indifferently and said, "I told you before, the Black Fire tribe's warriors are too few, not enough to support our ambition of reviving the Black Fire tribe as soon as possible. Therefore I can only find another way. The 20 people outside are also strong barbarian warriors. After receiving the Black Fire runes, they will also become valiant warriors. In this way the strength of the Black Fire tribe will increase by another level." Huoyin said angrily, "Nonsense. You're being reckless. In the future, every time you destroy a tribe, are you going to steal their warriors to do this?" "Yes." Lu Chen said calmly, "Didn't I already tell you about this idea? This is the most effective way to increase the strength of the Black Fire tribe in a short period of time." Huoyin took a deep breath and shook his head, saying, "But I also told you that this method is not appropriate. You should know that if there are too many of these foreign tribes with the power of demonization, even more than the warriors of our Black Fire tribe, when the time comes, what should we do?" You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.